Chapter 1069. Strange said solemnly, I've also heard of a similar version, but it's not as detailed. So, if these 5 powers are activated, Africa will face a catastrophe, and the test of the Creator will come again? Not Africa, Qianong said slowly, but all of humanity. Strange was about to refute, but then he realized and said solemnly, You mean, the apocalypse destroyed the ancient ape civilization, and their descendants are us. Even if the current human civilization is the successor of the ancient ape civilization, if the descendants of the ancient ape open the seal, it will be the entire human race that will face the challenge? Is the black man human? Qianong asked a question that Strange could not give a second answer to. Seeing that he could not answer, Qianong continued, Since the black man is human, then after the 5 ancient tribes open the seal, the civilization that will face the challenge of the Creator is, of course, the current human civilization. In order to screen out the best races and civilizations, the Creator sowed them throughout the galaxy, and even the entire universe. And this screening is the nightmare of all creatures in the universe, the apocalypse. If the 5 seals are broken, then the apocalypse calamity, the 10,000-year demonic tribulation, will immediately descend. Everyone present sucked in a breath of cold air. The ancient history of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s investigation, the last time apocalypses will descended, the unparalleled power, and the terrible disaster he brought, were still fresh in everyone's memory. However, that was only a negligible projection of apocalypse's will, a taboo creator, a little spirituality. Once this test really came, then humanity, and even the entire universe would face a life-and-death situation. But, Strange said, the master of Ebony Maw, the Titan god Thanos, was precisely trying to prevent the apocalypse from destroying the universe. Why would they release the apocalypse test? The test of the apocalypse is only aimed at the current human civilization. At worst, the entire Earth will be involved, so as long as humanity is destroyed, the whole disaster will naturally subside, and the apocalypse will withdraw the test, waiting for the next development of human civilization. So, Thanos is playing with fire. He is confident that the apocalypse will not expand and will not cause a devastating disaster to the entire universe. Then how can we stop this crazy behavior of Thanos? Hawkeye asked. Qianong replied, It's very simple to stop him. Just hand over Earth's infinite raw stone to Thanos and let him destroy half of the lives in the universe. Then we'll choose the second option, Steve said. Kill Thanos and his allies. Qianong pondered for a brief moment before continuing. There's another piece of bad news. One of the ancient tribes protecting the seal of the apocalypse, the Ndapaya tribe of the East African coast, was submerged by a tsunami yesterday. I suspect that Ebony Throat may have convinced a new ally, the Atlanteans. They manipulated the seawater to drown the Ndapaya tribe and seize the Stairway of the Sun. Atlanteans? Steve was surprised. Aren't they hiding at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and not communicating with the outside world? Why would they get involved? You don't know the hostility of the Atlanteans towards the current humans. They think that you monkeys have occupied their land, and even pretend to be humans. God knows how much they want to cleanse you vile spawns of the apocalypse. Therefore, Ebony Throat is using the Atlanteans' fear of the apocalypse to destroy you, and at the same time prevent the universe from falling into the hands of the apocalypse. This is entirely possible. Qianong continued. There's also another ancient tribe, the voodoo sect that guards the power of the Death Knight. It was also attacked yesterday. Qianong turned to Strange. The enemy is someone you know. Then he read out a name that Strange was unfamiliar yet familiar at the same time. Baron Mordo. Do you know him? Qianong said. He controls the voodoo sect's headquarters in Haiti. Now, the voodoo doll that represents souls has fallen into the hands of the enemy. Humanity is on the brink of extinction, Steve said solemnly. We must find a way to fight against Crow, Ebony Throat, and the allies of Thanos, as well as the Earth forces that Ebony Throat has persuaded to ally with Thanos. Our strength is very weak, and Asgard can't take care of itself. Hey! I'm still here, Thor protested. The Avengers have suffered heavy losses because of Adam's child has appeased them. We must unite with a new core and gather the heroes of the world to fight against them. To stop their plot to start the apocalypse. I suggest, Thor shouted. Do you want to set up a new Avengers? Or a powerful Avengers? The Ultimate Avengers, or the Ultimate Battle Team? I think the name Illuminati is better, Hawkeye suggested. At this time, a low voice interrupted their brainstorming about the name of the new organization. Chen-Ong whispered, Why should we set up a new organization? There are many organizations willing to protect this world and Earth. Come on, Thor said. Shield has already appeased them. Shield is not doing anything but Shield's predecessor organization is still around. Chen-Ong said. You mean the Homeland Strategic Defense and Logistics Agency? Hawkeye read out the awkward name. He spread his hands and said, I don't think it can fight against the collective will of the American consortiums. Chen-Ong looked at the tall pyramid that appeared on the edge of the horizon and said slowly, Since ancient times, the spear has been in the east, the shield is in the west. Steve Rogers suddenly looked up at the ancient ruins on the horizon. In 2620 BC, the power of famine guarded by the Ndapaya tribe, the Stairway of the Sun, was triggered by the arrogance of humanity. The powerful mutant Stairway of the Sun, that ran amok in the universe and fed on living planets, was revived. The insects that pollinated this terrible plant underwent a terrible evolution. A new species, the deadly existence known as the brood insectoids, was born. Just a tiny bit of the power of famine brought a fatal crisis to humanity at that time. The brood swept through the African continent and almost destroyed the ancient Egyptian civilization. It was at that time that an outstanding hero of humanity stepped forward. He said, Our world should not end like this. So he led the Egyptians to inflict heavy damage on the brood insectoids and force them to retreat into space. He stopped the Stairway of the Sun from reviving and protected the entire human civilization. He held a spear in one hand and a shield in the other. To commemorate this great redemption, the two weapons he used when he led humanity to resist the brood became the secret keepsakes of humanity. Since ancient times, the spear was in the east and the shield was in the west. Chapter 1070. I'll be in charge of the spear, you'll be in charge of the shield. Chen-Ong finally said to Rogers. What is he talking about? Hawkeye asked Rogers suspiciously as he watched Chen-Ong leave. Rogers was also puzzled, but he inexplicably recalled some of the relics handed over to him by his old lover, Carter's niece, and some of the words Carter said to him before he died. A vague shadow appeared in his mind. Wait! Rogers said to himself, he's asking us for the shield. Hawkeye was surprised. Shield? What shield? Rogers called Stark. After a while, a drunk man picked up the phone and muttered, Old Popsicle, it's rare that you still remember to call me. I should be glad that you can still see the name of the caller. Steve sighed and said, I need to know something about your father and take a look at the relics he gave you. Send them to me now. I know you've made digital files for those files and relics. Ask Friday to give them to me. I've never understood, Rogers said, why would Howard suggest the formation of the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Security Bureau and then give it a long and stinky name? It wasn't until a few years ago that they came up with an abbreviated name. If the name is not an accident, but an inheritance, a historical inheritance, then everything can be explained. A few minutes later, Rogers received the digital files Tawny had created for his father Howard's relic. He opened the file and said, This is Tawny's style. He always likes to reconstruct the remnants of the past in information, as if this can retain those memories. Rogers read a large number of files left by Agent Carter and Howard, which recorded the establishment of SHIELD, demolition, reconstruction, and the celebration of several founders when they moved into the new headquarters. His memory came alive little by little. Compared to the current era, these shadows of the past that stayed on paper just made him familiar. It made him feel as if he was next to several old friends. Rogers was a little distracted. He stared at the young Carter, Howard, and the SHIELD badge on the shield behind them. I wish I could stay with you in that era. This era is too strange, and it doesn't belong to me. Here, I'm like a lonely veteran coming out of history. My body may be young, but my heart is already old and burdensome. Rogers gently rubbed Carter's photo with his thumb and read in his heart. He noticed that the style of the SHIELD badge in the photo was somewhat different from the current one. The current SHIELD eagle, with the abstraction of industrial design, is composed of a few simple lines, but the eagle at that time had a much softer curve, like a hand-painted eagle. He noticed a few details in the photo, and he immediately broke away from the nostalgia of the past. I remember SHIELD has a base near the Red Sea. Hawkeye looked at Steve, who appeared at the door in surprise, and heard him say, "Let them send someone to pick us up." The Quinjet hovered on the tarmac of the SHIELD hub headquarters. As the canopy overhead was pushed closed by the motor, Steve walked down the cabin and saw Nick, the one-eyed chocolate-bald man. Nick smiled and said, "I will explain to you about Wakanda." Steve said, "I don't need your explanation. Crow is not our enemy, aliens are. We can't force him to the side of Thanos. Sometimes we need to make some compromises. The reason why Crow is not your enemy is because vibranium is your friend." Steve's face was not good. He said to Nick Fury, "That's why you compromised, and I advise you to be careful of your friend. Maybe it doesn't want to be friends with you. I know vibranium may have something to do with war." One-Eyed said, "That's why we have to control it." Steve said to him, "Take me to the main conference room, the one that Howard often uses." "Howard has never been to the hub," Nick said indifferently. "But SHIELD will definitely build a conference room of that style for him." Steve said calmly, "The founders of SHIELD are Howard and Colonel Phillips, but I found out in some other information that it's far more than that. Nathaniel Richards, the father of Dr. Reed in the Fantastic Four, was also the founder of SHIELD. They have a conference room that looks like a courthouse, with 5 seats on the top looking down. Behind them is a wall with the emblem of SHIELD and the 9 planets that revolve around SHIELD like the sun. Of course, it might be 8 now. And their orbit, around the emblem of SHIELD, has a radioactive pattern like the sun. Can you take me there now?" Nick Fury stared at him for a long time before he said, "You've described it so clearly, of course I know. Please come with me." On the way, Cyclops explained, when Howard founded SHIELD, it was an authoritative organization, even independent of the government. Just like the FBI at the time, this organization had its own will. They set up a conference hall that was as high up as a courtroom. But you know, this organization will eventually return to its original position, succumb to the government, and become an intelligence service organization. At that time, the ancient courtroom will no longer be applicable. We need to show obedience to the government, and not directly belong to the World Security Council, because the world's interests are complicated, but the interests of the United States are singular. SHIELD is rooted in the United States, and it can't always wear the skin of an international organization. Show independence. As Nick Fury spoke, he pushed open the door of a secret conference hall in the hub. The inside was just as Steve had described. Agent Carter insisted on moving the conference hall of the original headquarters here. Perhaps this is an old man's nostalgia for the past, so we also kept this place. Steve looked at the spotless hall and the high-tech equipment that had been used on the seats. He frowned and said, "This doesn't look like it's rarely used." Steve came to the seat and faced the wall inlaid with the S.H.I.E.L.D. emblem. He pressed his right hand on the S.H.I.E.L.D. emblem. Fortunately, he was tall enough. He pressed it a few times tentatively. The sensitive touch of his hand let him discover the secret. He twisted the emblem down, and the chassis of the emblem made a clicking sound of mechanical gears rotating. Just like the turntable of a safe, the eagle shield began to turn. Steve turned it 3 times, and found that the eagle on the shield began to emerge. He recalled the eagle shield in the old photo. The eagle's head on the old shield was twisted to the left, and now the eagle's head was turned to the right. Steve moved the eagle's head and it turned to the left. At this moment, Nick Fury's expression couldn't help but change. The eagle shield emitted the sound of mechanical gears twisting, and the entire shield suddenly caved in, neatly splitting apart from the middle, revealing a circular hole. Below the hole, an eagle relief with ancient Egyptian motifs appeared. A golden round shield had appeared where the S.H.I.E.L.D. emblem used to be. Steve took off the round shield and looked at the golden shield. This golden shield was full of historical texture. It was composed of red and gold, and there was an ancient Egyptian-style eagle engraved on it, representing the pharaoh's holy eagle. The round shield had a golden texture, but Steve could feel its strange texture with his tentacles. It was another kind of strange vibranium alloy, which made the round shield's defense even better than the original vibranium shield in Steve's hand. Steve murmured, "I know what template Huodahua used to create that round shield." Rather than saying that the shield in Steve's hand was Huodahua's original vibranium alloy round shield, it would be better to say that the shield that symbolized the American spirit was actually made by Huodahua in imitation of this shield. This was the real shield and the origin of S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve returned to Egypt with this shield. At the airport of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Egyptian base, as soon as Steve got off the plane, he saw a small gray-black spaceship parked nearby. Chen Ong waited under the spaceship, and a team of soldiers wearing Chinese military uniforms walked out of the spaceship. They handed a golden spear they carried with them to Chen Ong. The spearhead of the spear was like an open wing, and the same red and gold pattern formed the wings of the spearhead. The Step Pyramid, or the Step Pyramid of St. Kara, designed and built by Imhotep, is the oldest of all the pyramids in Egypt. In a secret temple inside the pyramid, Chen Ong and Steve stood on both sides of the gate that symbolized the underworld. There were 2 ancient reliefs on the gate. Steve placed the shield brought back from S.H.I.E.L.D. in the groove of the ancient stone sculpture and perfectly inlaid it, while Chen Ong inserted the spear handed to him by the Republic of Republic into the keyhole of the stone gate. As the spear key twisted, the entire pyramid trembled slightly. From the outside, the entire pyramid slowly split along the edge, revealing a metal pyramid made of golden vibranium alloy. The tip of the metal pyramid shot out a beam of platinum light that soared straight into the sky, disappearing into the heavens. The shadow of the pharaoh's eagle was projected in the sky, visible to half the world. Chen Ong looked at the golden pyramid that appeared in front of him, and a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The interior of the metal pyramid was decorated with the characteristics of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, ancient China, and other civilizations. It was full of mystery and elegance. The completely cracked step pyramid became a takeoff passage, allowing the entire metal pyramid to slowly float in the air. What was exposed on the surface was only a trivial part of it. Underground, there was a larger body. What appeared in front of them was the secret base of the Holy Shield Brotherhood, the floating pyramid. Chapter 1071. Inside the floating pyramid was a huge war fortress. At this time, the entire pyramid fortress had reached an altitude of about 30,000 meters above the atmosphere, orbiting the Earth. This war fortress, left behind by the Holy Shield Brotherhood for the future war against aliens and the Four Horsemen, contained a large number of vibranium weapons and floating battleships. The floating battleships were made of vibranium alloy as if they were made of gold, and the indestructible metal hull was attached to a protective shield that flowed with blue energy. It was shaped like a wooden boat in ancient Egypt, with embossed patterns that represented the sun flowing on it. Chun-Ong led the group to the cabin where the fleet was parked and said, "These are sunboats, medium-sized war machines made of vibranium produced in Wakanda using the technology of an ancient civilization. In the books of the Divine Spear Bureau, they are called sunboats. Legend has it that the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra rode a golden boat through the sky, and when night fell, he would enter the underworld on the golden boat. At that time, there would be terrifying monsters spying on him, so Seth and Mahan would protect him." Strange explained the ancient Egyptian myth and asked curiously, "Did the name sunboats originate from this story?" Chun-Ong cleared his throat and glanced at Strange. In fact, these war machines were built in 2620 BC, when the myth of Ra had yet to take shape. In fact, it was the history of the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield that created the myth, and not biochemistry. The founder of the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield, Imidon, was revered as the god of medicine and science in Egyptian history, and in fact, he was the only human to be revered as a god in the West. Let's not talk about whether the name and image of sunboats influenced the later myths of ancient Egypt. They were called sunboats because during the war against the famine mutant Brood, these ships would carry a type of weapon, and everyone who saw the power of that weapon would claim that they saw the sun. That's how the ships got their name. The sun? Steve Rogers said solemnly, "You're saying that they're ancient nuclear weapons? Clean nuclear weapons?" The officer sent by the YPG suddenly appeared from behind and explained, "I just went to the armory to check. Inside, there are some neutron bombs loaded in the outer shell of vibranium. The creator here used the special properties of vibranium to make the radioactive objects inside fall into hibernation. They strangely stopped their radiation, and they haven't even passed their first half-life. In other words," Steve said, "these nuclear weapons, yes, they can still be used." The YPG special agent said, "In fact, they are not conventional nuclear weapons. The neutron bomb is also known as the weak shock-wave strong radiation bomb. When it explodes, it can release a large number of deadly neutrons and greatly reduce the effect of the shock wave. On the battlefield, the neutron bullet only kills living targets such as people, and does not destroy buildings, technical equipment, and other equipment. This is a type of nuclear weapon used to destroy carbon-based organisms and avoid large-scale destruction. This is far beyond my expectations," Turkara said. "I thought they relied on spears and shields to defeat those alien insectoids." Also, Turkara looked at the floating pyramid with a terrible expression. "This place is filled with vibranium. Where did the Brotherhood of Holy Shield get their vibranium from? I think it's necessary to discuss this." "From Wakanda," the YPG special agent said. "We just checked the database here, and it's hard to imagine that the entire database of the floating pyramid is made up of a very complicated differential machine. The parts made of vibranium are only microns in size, and are very precise and powerful. It can be said to be the pinnacle of mechanical computing. Interestingly, the input and output data of these differential machines are also binary unit. 0 and 1? Strange asked with interest. What an interesting coincidence. The YPG special agent awkwardly but politely corrected him. It's yin and yang. The data here is represented by trigrams, and the entire database is a cutting-edge mathematical system with the Book of Changes as its core. Its underlying mechanical language is quite different from C language. It is a system developed from trigrams and includes fuzzy judgment and binary calculation. We suspect that the mechanical language of this system is made up of Lianshan, Wuzhong, and Zhou Sanjing. Because of this, we can quickly crack the underlying language, and then use the quantum AI to translate it. Okay, we'll discuss these ancient civilizations and superancient technologies later, Chen Ong said. Tell me about the findings in the database. Fortunately, they don't use hieroglyphics. The special agent joked. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to crack it at all. We found that this floating fortress was originally built by the ancient civilizations on Earth to help ancient Egypt. It was a war fortress to fight against the famine mutant Brood. The records show that, but the relationship between the civilizations on Earth is closer than we thought. That was the era before the collapse of the Tower of Babel. After the seal in Africa had a problem, in order to help the ancient Egyptian civilization fight against the invasion of the mutants, they eliminated the budding disaster. All the civilizations sent their elites, contributed their resources and technology, and worked together to build this war fortress. Finally, under the command of the Egyptian sage, En-Hetien, they defeated the mutants. In order to thank them for their friendship, En-Hetien gave his spear and shield to the two civilizations that helped them the most at that time, Babylon and Huaxia. At the same time, he announced that this fortress would not be used for the civil war between the ancient civilizations. The Egyptians buried it underground, and built the first pyramid in human history on top of it, imitating the appearance of this fortress. The ancient civilizations agreed that this fortress could only be used when humanity as a whole faced external disasters. In order to maintain and guarantee the maintenance of this war fortress, the various civilizations sent out their own sages. They controlled this terrifying war machine and worked together to operate it to deal with the common crisis and the future apocalypse. This was the embryonic form of the Holy Shield Brotherhood. This fortress used the metallurgy of Huaxia and Atlantis, using the Wakanda tribe's vibranium as the raw material. The ancient Babylonians built its anti-gravity system, the Egyptians built the solar arc to protect it, and the ancient Hindus contributed their neutron weapon, Urnia. The Ndapaya tribe created a super warrior serum, which made the warriors operating the fortress incomparably powerful. The Norse Asgardians built its energy system, the Atlanteans were responsible for its defense system, and the Chinese created its brain. The ancient Greeks created its navigation system. It's the crystallization of the ancient civilization's technology. It carried several powerful weapons, puppets controlled by magicians, beasts commanded by wizards, high-energy weapons created by gods and demigods, lasers, neutron bullets, magic, and dimensional machines. Why did these ancient civilizations and technology disappear from history? Strange asked in confusion. The commissioner's expression changed slightly when he heard that. Turkara also asked, Wakanda contributed vibranium? This is all evidence, but why didn't our ancestors record anything? So much vibranium was used up, and yet there's no trace of Wakanda's history? I can't believe it. The commissioner stammered. Maybe they didn't want to record it. Why? Turkara asked nervously. The commissioner answered awkwardly but politely. The ancient civilizations were united because they belonged to the same race, the ancient humans. The current human species was their slaves back then. They saw us as monkeys, slaves, and inferior beings. That's why the database recorded the friendship of the ancient civilizations, the human civilizations that came from another universe to face the apocalypse together, and the providers of vibranium like Wakanda. In the eyes of the Egyptians, the Wakanda people were slaves who mined vibranium for them. The 5 ancient African tribes were all servants and slaves of the ancient Egyptians, monkey people. And the Egyptians thought of themselves as eagles, the descendants of the sky and the sun. In this war fortress there are totems of the Egyptians, Huaxia, Babylonia, and even ancient India and Greece. And the totems that represent you, they don't have the right to be carved here. Turkara was enraged, and Steve frowned. But according to HIEL's genetic research on various ethnic groups, the Egyptians are marked. That's because the ancient Egyptians and the current Egyptians are not the same race. This also applies to the ancient Greeks, the ancient Indians, and the research of the Revolutionary Alliance. Those ancient civilizations and the ethnic groups that claim to have inherited them are not the same race. The current Egyptians are the Semites, the race created by the Creator, or God. That is, the race that walked out of Africa and was enlightened by Messiah. And the real ancient civilizations, other than the Huaxia, Atlanteans, and Lemurians, no one else exists. The ancient Babylonians suffered the apocalypse because of the Tower of Babel, and their entire race was wiped out. The ancient Greek civilization was too close to Babylon and suffered heavy losses. The survivors may have retreated to Atlantis. The great flood that ancient Huaxia suffered was probably also the apocalypse. Later, they were forced to forget their ancient technology and degenerate into a civilization to protect themselves, Chen Ong answered. All of the ancient civilizations were afraid of that existence, Chen Ong said emotionally. They once tried to unite together to face the test of the apocalypse, and they succeeded in ancient Egypt. But in Babylon they failed. That disaster directly led to the destruction of Babylon and the silence of the ancient civilization. Only then did modern humans replace the ancient humans and become the pillar of civilization on this planet. So, the predecessor of the Holy Shield Brotherhood actually failed, Chen Ong said loudly, because all of the ancient civilizations actually failed to be passed down. The ancestors of modern humans, the powerful primeval apes, faced extinction in the face of the apocalypse calamity, leaving behind only 5 ancient tribes. The ancient civilizations that the remnants of the ancient humans redeveloped also encountered the test of the apocalypse. Although they won once, they did not win a second time. They only left behind these relics and the descendants of the degenerated or hidden civilizations. Faced with the test of the apocalypse, they all failed. Chapter 1072. Anthony Edward Stark returned to his Ocean View mansion in a drunken stupor. Carrying 2 bottles of 25-year whiskey in his hand, he staggered as he opened the front door and fell headfirst onto the sofa. Chili Pepper appeared in the doorway of the living room and leaned against the doorframe to watch him. "Friday," Stark said vaguely. "Turn on the TV, Antonio." Little Pepper began to shout Stark's name. "You have brains, you have money, and you have me. You have the identity of an Avenger and an Iron Man, a child's dream, but now you're here drinking whiskey and destroying your own life. Why is this happening? What has robbed you of your courage? Get lost. I don't want to hear you yell," Stark said in a low voice. Little Pepper's face was dejected. She turned her head away, not wanting Tawny to see the tears in her eyes. She said in a low voice, "I'm going to quit, Stark." Tawny did not answer. He hid his face under the sofa. As an artificial intelligence, Friday was obedient and quiet, not daring to make a sound. Little Chili Pepper finally gave up all hope. She turned around and prepared to leave. As she walked towards the door in her high heels, Stack's head that was buried under the sofa mumbled something inexplicable. "We're all going to die. The whole world will be dark, there is no hope." Little Pepper stopped, tears falling from her eyes. She turned back to Stark and said, "We will all die, but we still have hope. Only those who give up will give up hope." "You don't understand what I saw, Pepper." Stark seemed unmoved. "I've already moved my things out," Little Pepper said. "I think I need to be alone to clear my head, and you need to be alone too. Live on with your whiskey. I don't care anymore." Pepper slammed the door and left. Tawny lifted his head from the sofa and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He said to Friday, Add some ice, turn on the TV. The TV that took up an entire wall of his mansion was switched on. A mechanical hand took out ice cubes from the fridge and placed them into the wine glass. Friday hesitated and said, "Sir, your alcohol consumption today has exceeded the Federation's alcohol limit. Do you think it's your turn to lecture me?" Stark scolded in annoyance. The voice of a news broadcast came from the television. "It can be seen on the West Coast. We have received reports from amateur astronomy enthusiasts. From 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we were able to observe the floating pyramid with astronomical telescope. According to some sources, it rose from Egypt. Thousands of locals witnessed the step pyramid opening up a passage, and the giant object, which was nearly a kilometer tall and hundreds of meters wide, flew out of it. Before that, the entire Western Hemisphere could see the projection of the eagle in the sky. This was the largest and most detailed UFO incident in human history. Where did it come from? Was it an alien spaceship lurking on Earth, or a masterpiece of an ancient civilization? Is it a miracle built by the Egyptian pharaohs, or is it evidence of aliens in Earth's history? It's the Cybertrons. The local named Sam vowed solemnly, about 4,000 years ago, 13 progenitor Cybertron elders came to Earth and enslaved the local residents to build the pyramids. They built this machine at the bottom of the pyramids, and the key to opening this machine is the energy matrix. Once the energy matrix is activated, the floating pyramid will turn the sun into a tinder and bring it back to save their planet. This is the aliens' conspiracy. The beautiful reporter continued the interview. "Then how did you know all this?" Sam said enthusiastically, "When my grandfather was exploring the South Pole, he once discovered the leader of the Cybertronians, Megatron. It engraved the knowledge of the Cybertronians into my grandfather's glasses. One day, I put on my glasses, and my Chevrolet changed shape. The laughter of the locals could be heard in the background of the interview. "Come on. Sam, your grandfather is a shoemaker. He's never been to the South Pole. Do you still believe in your dream? Crazy Sam. Crazy Sam, your family doesn't have a Chevrolet sports car, only a broken Ford pickup truck." "Why not? I picked it up from the garbage myself," Sam argued. The beautiful reporter was embarrassed and disheveled. Why did she have to interview a lunatic? The director quickly switched the scene back to the scene. An expert who looked like a dog was explaining, "We all know about the existence of aliens. From the Battle of New York to the disaster of New York, it's natural that the ancient Egyptians had contact with aliens. In ancient Egypt, the image of the gods that the local people worshipped might have come from the pharaohs claimed to be the children of God. They intermarried, and modern scientific research shows that the genes of the pharaohs." Stark raised his hand to turn off the TV. He said in a low voice, "Idiot. I'd rather listen to that lunatic's crazy talk. At least it's interesting. Those idiots always talk about aliens, but they don't know that right next to them, China is a living alien country. Aliens are your neighbors, separated only by the Pacific Ocean." With a drunken look, Stack pulled out the information that Steve had asked him for. With familiarity, he chose a piece of vellum. On it was a drawing of a building that looked exactly like the floating pyramid on TV. Tony flipped over the piece of vellum. On the back of the paper were some seemingly useless graffiti and messy word. Stark stared at the graffiti of a spear and a shield for a long time. He suddenly stood up, went to the bathroom and splashed a few handfuls of cold water on his face. He called Nick Fury and said, "One-eyed wolf, I need information about what Steve took from you." "I won't trade him for wine." After getting the promise, Stark sat on the sofa and looked through the information that he was already very familiar with, waiting for the data from S. H.I.E.L.D. He looked up the outdated information of the Magic Spear Bureau, inquired about Steve's movements, and asked the Department of Defense for information about the floating pyramid. He even called his old friend Crow. "Hey! Isn't this the head of our arms dealers, the Man of Steel?" Crow crossed his legs on the desk, leaned back in his chair and said to Stark, "It's rare for you to contact me, benefactor? Let's talk about the past later." Stark said straightforwardly, "I want what happened to Steve at your place. Video, text, or you can tell me in person. Anything is fine. Stark Industries will support your vibranium futures." "You don't care about that poor king?" Crow laughed. "Your comrade, Captain America, is very supportive of him. He has brought us a lot of trouble. No one will support a dictator. What era are we in now? The people don't need a king." Stark said, "Send me the information. You know my email address." Chapter 1073. In the command room of the floating pyramid, Steve was holding a shield and doing weapon adaptation training. Hawkeye sat next to him, modifying his bow and arrows. Seeing Steve holding the ancient Egyptian shield, he laughed and said, "Every time you throw a shield, there is always a new one coming up. Captain America's body should be that shield. Or should you change your name to Shield Man?" Steve buckled the shield and said, "Don't make fun of it. This is a relic of our ancestors. SHIELD uses it as a symbol," Hawkeye said, "but you use it to fight. If you break it, Nick Fury will not forgive you. This shield was born to protect mankind." Steve picked up the shield and said, "Now it is just used for what it should be used for. I still remember a sentence I heard when I was training at SHIELD. Hawkeye said, "We are a shield that protects mankind between the known world and the unknown world." At this time, Chen Ong came over and said to them, "Come here. It's time for a meeting." When they arrived at the venue, there were already many people there. Chen Ong said, "In order to deal with the crisis on the African continent and prevent the restart of the apocalypse, we launched the floating fortress built by the ancient civilization and rebuilt the Holy Shield Brotherhood to protect mankind. The spear is in the east, the shield is in the west. Only by gathering the forces of the east and the west can the Holy Shield Brotherhood be a complete brotherhood." Captain Steve and I, as the initiators of the two sides of the conflict, invited Prince Thor of Asgard, Camartage Supreme Wizard Strange, former SHIELD Agent Hawkeye, as well as Sam the Falcon, Camartage Wizard Lao Wang, Black Panther Turkra of Wakanda, one of the 5 ancient Guardian tribes. Let me introduce you to a few new members. As soon as Chen Ang's voice fell, several people pushed open the door of the conference room and came in. Steve and others turned their heads and saw a surprised look on their faces. Hawkeye stared at one of them with a complicated look. Chen Ong noticed Hawkeye's look and smiled. "There are a lot of acquaintances, right?" He pointed at a voluptuous, red-haired female agent and introduced her to everyone, Special Commissioner of the Soviet Union of the Revolutionary Union, Natasha. "You should be very familiar with her. She is your former colleague. As the Soviet Union's Special Commissioner, he joined the Battle of the Holy Shield. And the European Community Commissioner, Merlin and Arthur." Natasha went straight to the round table, pulled out a chair and sat down. Merlin, the Special Commissioner of the European Community, was an old man with a big beard, wearing a cloak and holding a long cane. Arthur, on the other hand, was a square-faced man with thick eyebrows and a two-handed sword on his back. "I'm Kong Keenan, a special agent from the China side of the Revolutionary Alliance. Like Natasha, he's a former member of the Liberators, and he's now joining the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield as a special commissioner." Kong Keenan was now a young soldier full of heroic spirit, with a very obvious military style. Even though he was sitting on a chair, his back was involuntarily straight. Just when everyone thought that everyone had arrived, the last person walked in on her high heels. Steve stood up in surprise when he saw her. "Little chilly. Just call me Kelly." Little Chili shrugged indifferently. I'm completely disappointed in that bastard. Just in time for someone to invite me here. I thought about it, if someone invited me to save the world, then why not? Little Chili laughed heartily. Steve pulled out the seat next to her, and after Little Chili sat down, representing the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield was reconstituted. Chun-Ong looked around at everyone present, then turned to Little Chili and asked, "You don't mind wearing this in battle, do you?" He stretched out his hand, and a set of steel armor rose from the center of the round table. Chun-Ong introduced it. This is the work of a child that Anthony Stark met when he visited the Revolutionary Alliance, and was replicated. The child modified it as a graduation project for his handicraft class. I hope Mr. Stark won't sue him for patent infringement. I'm not that kind of woman, Little Chili replied generously. I hope that when I wear it in battle, I can give Stark a little inspiration. I've already talked to Nick Fury about the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield. He said that as a member of the Divine Shield, he will give us support. SHIEL. DS base, equipment, materials, and personnel can be coordinated and borrowed. The Revolutionary Alliance has also expressed their support for us. They will support some of the materials and technology of the former Holy Spear Bureau. So, Chin-Ong gestured to Little Chili and said, "Don't worry about not being able to afford it. Stark only has one group supporting his toy, and you now have the endorsement of the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield, which is supported by both the East and the West. This floating battleship will be our logistics base, but although this floating battleship is powerful, some of its technology is outdated. It will be remodeled and supported by the Republic of Republic. If you are willing, you can also participate in the maintenance and remodeling." "Alright, let's talk about small talk later." Chun-Ong kept the iron suit into the armory. A ray of light projected from the center of the round table, turning into a lifelike projection of the African continent. Wakanda, the Ndapaya tribe, and the Haitian voodoo cult headquarters were specially projected with silver light. Steve answered, "We now know that there are 5 ancient tribes that guard the apocalypse. 4 of them have unknown identities. They are the Wakanda tribe that guard the Knights of War, the voodoo dolls that guard the Knights of Death, the voodoo cultists that were originally located in Benin but later moved to America and Haiti, the Ndapaya tribe that guard the Knights of Famine, the Stairway of the Sun. These 3 tribes have been overrun by Ebony Throat's collusion with the arms dealer Ulysses Crow, the Camartage trader Baron Mordo, and the Atlanteans. The symbol of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse has fallen into Ebony Throat's hand. What's left is the Ebola tribe, which has been preserved in the Plague Knight's power, which has not fallen into Ebony Throat's hands. Ebony Throat probably doesn't know where the last ancient tribe that has preserved the power of the Apocalypse Messiah is." Tekara pondered for a moment before saying, "In fact, even though I'm the leader of one of the 5 ancient tribes and the king of Wakanda, I still don't know where the last ancient tribe is, the tribe that preserved the power of destiny. It's as if my ancestors had erased all traces of them. Therefore, as an alien, it's even more impossible for Ebony Throat to know where they are. They should still be safe." Chun-Ong added, "In fact, only the Holy Shield Brotherhood knows where they are. But for the sake of confidentiality, I can't tell everyone here. So now they only have one target, the Ebola tribe." Natasha propped her elbows on the table and rested her chin on her hand. "Yes," Chun-Ong continued, "and we suspect that the reason they haven't made a move against Ebola is because they want to use it as a trap to lure us out. Then, through us, they will learn the location of the last seal. But even if this is a trap, we can't refuse it. Because Vibranium, the Stairway of the Sun, and the voodoo puppets are all reviving." Steve asked, "Is that so?" "Yes, the Stairway of the Sun will unlock the evolutionary lock of nearby creatures. Vibranium will begin to slowly revive and become active, solving all the material problems and unlocking the technological lock of human civilization. As for the voodoo doll, it will transform the people nearby into another state and unlock the soul lock. Its mimetic effect will begin to spread on a large scale, starting with those voodoo wizards. Previously, the Stairway of the Sun alone created the mutant brooder that almost destroyed humanity. If we delay any longer, the consequences will be unimaginable. Therefore, we have to beat them at their own game, completely destroy the Ebola tribe, and reseal what the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse left behind. Chenong's tone was solemn. If we fail, in human history, the only civilization that faced the power seal of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at the same time was the extinct ancient civilization of Babylon. Because of the Tower of Babel project, it was thought to be the signal to face the test of the apocalypse. There are no records of that disaster. We only know that the disaster destroyed all the ancient civilizations that worked together and caused the entire ancient human civilization to fall into silence, leading to the rise of modern humans. Only now do the Atlanteans dare to show their heads. I don't want us to face a test of this level, Steve said. Perhaps it's even worse. What if the secret of the 5th tribe is also known by Ebony Throat? Chapter 1074. In the city of the dead in Egypt, a mysterious hooded man wandered around the place where Chen Ong and Strange were capturing the voodoo wizard. He pushed open the door of a large hole and walked in, closing the fearful gazes of the locals behind him. The room was still as gloomy as ever. The voodoo wizards had left behind all kinds of animal bones. There were organs and strange things soaked in medicinal liquid, dried animal products, herbs and black magic materials taken from the bodies of dead people. The mysterious man slowly took off his hood, revealing a black face. It was Baron Mordo, who had just destroyed the voodoo cult's base camp. Coming to Africa, he could blend in with the locals without feeling out of place, but he still chose a conspicuous wizard attire to show his inner sense of honor as a wizard. Mordo was a pitiful man. He had been following the guidance of his teacher, the Ancient One, all his life, following the path of the Ancient One, but in the end, he realized that the Ancient One had already betrayed the path he claimed. Mordo! A voice suddenly sounded behind him. Baron Mordo turned around abruptly, only to see Strange sitting in the darkness looking at him. You knew I would come here? Mordo leaned against the table and looked at Strange. I joined an organization, Strange said calmly. They are very resourceful and well-informed. Egypt is our base camp. It is impossible for you to move around here without our eyes. The Paragon Wizard never joins other people's organizations. He will always be the leader, Mordo said. Strange, however, disagreed. The Paragon Wizard never sets these rules for himself. Other than the responsibility of the Paragon Wizard, we have no restrictions, and we don't need any restrictions. That's why I'm the Paragon Wizard and you're not. You care too much about the commandments you set for yourself. Without commandments, acting recklessly like the Ancient One will bring disaster. Mordo said loudly. That's why the Ancient One died. He did it to protect the world, Strange shouted. He noticed the symbol that appeared between Mordo's eyebrows and said in surprise, You said that? But you also sided with Dom's Mu. I never understood why you were involved in this matter. It turns out that it was because of Dom Mu's orders that you became his lackey. I just made a deal with it, Mordo said. I already understand the mage's mission. Ancient One was wrong. What we are protecting is not this small planet and the humans on it. Humans have been destroying themselves, and no one can protect them. What we are really protecting is the unknown world, the balance between the mysterious and the known world. What we should revere is the great law of equilibrium. Dom Mu also understands this. Although the greed of darkness always makes it want to devour our world, I will still stand up and fight against it at this time. But when Dom Mu protects the entire universe, including the balance of the dark plane, I should also lend a hand. Thanos, they are saving this universe. But Thanos' goal is to kill half of all life in this universe. Strange said angrily. Mordo didn't care. Life was too insignificant. When mages looked at the entire universe, they would discover many great things. Space, dimensions, time, planets, matter, energy. Too many great things perfectly formed the entire world, and what maintained them was balance. Balance created and maintained everything. Once balance no longer existed, all the elements would clash, and everything would be destroyed and cease to exist. At that time, how could life exist alone? This was what Mordo realized. Mages should not focus on the insignificant individual life that was constantly being born and dying. Instead, they should focus on the balance that maintained everything behind it. And life was only a weight that maintained the balance. Although it was necessary, more or less was the result of the law of equilibrium. Mordo just replied, I once wanted to follow the Ancient One to destroy the darkness, but after realizing that the Ancient One and Mu were just two sides of the balance between light and darkness, I realized that what we should really protect was balance. Mages are not nannies, not servants of this planet, not the guardians of mere humans. What we should work for is something greater. Strange opened his palm, and a circle of runes appeared in his palm. Strange said, As the Sorcerer Supreme, I have the responsibility to clean up the traitors among the mages. It was I who led you to Camartage back then. Mordo stretched out his hands and pulled out the scepter of the Tribunal of Life from his sleeves. Strange suddenly interrupted, It seems that you have taken a lot of good things from Camartage. Mordo was taken aback, then continued, It was I who taught you magic, leading you into the mysterious palace of magic. These things are not yours. I have a share of them as well. I am also a disciple of the Ancient One. But you betrayed him. It was he who betrayed me first. Mordo said angrily, I respected him so much, but he hid it from me. He hid the true path and power of mages. I once led you into the palace of mages. Mordo said to Strange, Now I will teach you the true path of mages. Shameless boasting. Strange pulled out the magic whip that was coming to life, and with one lash the entire world turned upside down. The city of the dead split into countless fragments and reassembled like Lego brick. The nearby pillars formed countless geometric patterns, and space lost the meaning of up, down, left, and right. Mordo and Strange jumped around in the complex geometric space, exchanging blows from time to time. While Strange was using spells to reconstruct the terrain so that Mordo could only move on the path he had planned, he was also using the power of the Eye of Agamotto to travel through time, the surrounding space and time forming a complex maze that was being deconstructed. The maze formed in space, coupled with the fragmentation of time, trapped Mordo in it, unable to escape. However, Strange was still careless. When he separated the distance between the two of them again, Mordo jumped into the air, using the water boots of leap on his feet to jump into the air. Golden ripples appeared under his feet as if he was stepping on something solid. Using the force to change his direction, he crossed the seemingly insurmountable barrier, nimbly changing angles around Strange, and swung his staff at Strange's face. But when the scepter of the Tribunal of Life hit Strange, his figure turned into broken light and shadow like the surface of water. At this time, Strange's real figure appeared behind Mordo, the long whip in his hand wrapped around Mordo's neck, and he shouted, Don't move! Mordo opened his hands, placed them on both sides of his shoulders, and smiled. Not bad, you've improved. I didn't learn everything from you. Strange said. After we parted, I've improved a lot, and I'm no longer that clumsy apprentice. But it's not enough. A face suddenly appeared behind Mordo's head, speaking to Strange. Suddenly, a few pale hands with very dirty nails and deformed joints reached out from behind Strange's head, piercing through the hair at the back of his head and grabbing his face. Strange tightened his right hand, and the magic energy whip in his hand cut off Mordo's neck. But Baron Mordo suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed his head. His head was held in his hand, and he said, But after leaving the Ancient One, I've also learned a lot. Black magic. Strange's face was almost completely covered by those hands. His eyes looked at Mordo through the gaps between his fingers, and he said sadly, "Not only did you join Dom Mu, but you also made a deal with Mephitis." "Yes, Dom Mu introduced me to him. I signed a contract with him, using a part of my soul to exchange for its power for everyone, and to pick up the black magic of the Middle Ages. And—" Mordo put his head back on his head and stretched out a hand. It was covered with bone spurs and black scales, like a lizard's claw, burning with pale flames. "Satan asked me to send his regards to the Revolutionary Alliance. He said that he no longer wanted to be questioned in hell. This is a great insult to the Lord of Hell. You also signed a contract with Satan and exchanged it for hell magic." Strange could no longer see Mordo, and the hand grabbing him from behind his head had already covered his face. Baron Mordo's demonic hand had pierced through Strange's chest. But at this time, a transparent and colorless blade formed by spatial distortion had also pierced through Mordo's chest. Another Strange stood behind Mordo, and the symbol of Dom Mu's dark space appeared between his brows. "You're just like the Ancient One," Mordo said. "Both so hypocritical. This is the power of the Eye of Agamotto. It's your overflowing time, isn't it?" Mordo's body split in half from the wound. The two halves turned to look at Strange, then took a step forward and fused together, forming another complete Mordo. "Why didn't I suffer from the damage of time?" Mordo said. "You should have deprived me of all time when you stabbed me. You must be very puzzled, because I haven't read the Book of Wylician, nor have I obtained the complete Book of Cagliostro. But before I left, when I sneaked into Ancient One's bookshelf, I accidentally found an incomplete magic book, Xian Jun's 7 Secret Scriptures, and I found a secret from Ancient One's notes." Strange's expression suddenly changed. "You saw the notes that Ancient One hid with magic? The origin of Camartage. We are all servants of that existence. The Apocalypse, or the primordial heavenly demon, also known as Xian. Xian and Jun, the primordial heavenly demon, and Laozi left Hangu Pass and discussed the Tao in Lu Guan, passing down Yi Shi's Lu Guan Tao lineage and Yangzhou school. Later, Yangzhou school did not fall behind, and one of their Taoist academic factions began to focus on spells. They inherited the only notes of that discussion, Yi Shi's 7 chapters of Xian Jun, and no other secret knowledge was recorded. They are our ancestors." This knowledge was mistakenly recorded by Sithorn, one of the mages who read them. Those secret knowledge have no names. It records the knowledge of the gates to different dimensional worlds and the construction of dimensional gates, such as the Dark Gate and the Well of the Sun. Some knowledge was sealed because it was too powerful. It is a part of darkness, and the Sorcerer Supreme calls it the Book of Darkness. The part of light is known as the Book of Wylician. But the Book of Darkness has long been missing. It has long been stolen, Strange said. Chapter 1075. The Ancient One has been searching for it for many years, Strange said. You can't do what the Ancient One can't do in such a short period of time. No, it's simpler than you think. Mordo smiled. Because of my deal with Mephitis, he gave me this information. After all, the sorcerer Sithorn who recorded his secret spells is a demon just like them. I found this book in the basement of the ancestral home of Mephitis's caretaker, the new ghost rider, Johnny Blaze. It seems that you have a good relationship with them. In fact, the power of the Camartage sorcerers comes from different dimensions. We collect energy from other dimensions, shape it into spells, and use it to attack the enemy. This is the concept of that existence, and we have fully inherited it, Mordo said. You can't imagine the power of the knowledge recorded in the Dark Book. The essence of the Sorcerer Supreme is to make deals. Make deals with the rulers of those strange dimensions to get their help and obtain energy from those dimensional planes. You made a deal with Wilshendi and obtained the energy needed for Camartage spells. Ancient One made a deal with Dormammu to steal dark power from the dark dimension to extend his life. The power of each dimension can be forged into different weapons. This is the difference between spells. Now, I have the magic power of Wilshendi's dimension, Dormammu's dimension, Mephitis' dimension, and even Satan's dimension hell. My power has surpassed yours, Strange. Morton said, except for the eye of Agamotto on your chest, I have long surpassed you in all aspects. The tragedy of the Ancient One is that he has no bargaining chips of his own. He always borrows the power of others, but he tries to stand in his own position. This is the root of the tragedy. He thinks he is standing firm, but in fact, he is a clown who wavers between giants. Just like how you try to please Mephitis and Satan at the same time, trying to waver between them to protect your sad soul. Strange asked sharply, not allowing him to insult the Ancient One he respected. Morton fell silent. After a long time, he sighed and said, Yes, I can't get out of this predicament either. But the grimoire of darkness helped me find a direction. It recorded a magic experiment of that existence. Using great power, it opened a door to a dimension where time was almost still. Then, it completely burned the power of a star, and with the sun as a coordinate, it used the endless energy absorbed from the well to cast a special magic circle on the sun. It was a fixed well that led to that dimension. This is one of the ultimate spells, Sun Well. In a dimension where time flows at Planck's speed, the fluctuations of vacuum could be easily observed. A pair of positrons and electrons would rapidly form and then vanish. If such a door could really be opened, it means. Strange muttered a little absent-mindedly. This means mages can easily obtain energy and matter from it. I will no longer be controlled by anyone. Morton said, mages will be truly great. We will be like Dom, Mu, and Wilshendi, becoming the masters of dimensions. Strange calculated, the energy density of the vacuum can be as high as. This idea is completely feasible. But how do you find the coordinates of the time-halt plane? Where do you get the powerful energy to open the dimensional door? How do you shape a star and make it the mouth of a well? How do you complete such a powerful spell as the Sunwell? Mordo said, I have an idea for all of this. I can complete it. Then, prove it to me? Strange seemed tempted. Mordo thought for a while and decided to reveal his trump card. With the eye of Agamotto, you can lock onto that strange dimension. Only the power of the primordial time stone can discover that universe where time is infinitely close to stopping. The tesseract of the universe has the powerful power to open dimensional doors. And Dom Mu will provide a star as the mouth of a well. I will temporarily open the dimensional door to the well of eternity, and use the power of that most powerful spell to shape the Sunwell. Strange heard Mordo's plan and was silent for a long time before saying, You're crazy, Mordo. Mordo raised his head in disbelief. You are a mage. No mage will refuse this spell. But I am first and foremost a human, Strange said. You have been completely controlled by that existence's magic to the point that you have forgotten. He is an existence countless times darker than Dom Mu. Compared to him, Dom Mu is still a child, or rather, an ant. This is more dangerous than coming into contact with the dark dimension. Back then, Kamartaj's most talented occult mage, Sithorn, became crazy because he read this part of the knowledge. In the end, he made a dangerous act that almost destroyed the world. Unlike you, he was not crazy enough to want to build a sunwell. He just wanted to come into contact with the legendary inexhaustible source of energy for mages, the ultimate creation of matter and energy, created by that existence, the well of eternity. Sithorn bewitched many people and even obtained the support of that generation's supreme mage. They also believed that mages were people who collected energy from different dimensions and could cast it into weapons. So they completed a ritual and came into contact with the well of eternity. Then, Sithorn became an evil god, and Kamartaj was almost destroyed? that endless darkness is not something that human souls can come into contact with. This is why the previous generations of supreme mages wanted to seal the dark book. Strange said, "Mordor, you have fallen into darkness." Mordor lowered his head and laughed softly. When he raised his head and laughed, Strange's expression became sorrowful. Mordor smiled. "In that case, I can only snatch it." He raised the scepter of the Tribunal of Life in his hand. The meaning was self-evident. Strange pulled out an energy whip. The full name of this spell was Crimson Magic Belt of Cedarak. But Mordor laughed. "You are no match for me at all. I was just playing with you before. Now I'm going all out." Black smoke and magma flowed all over his body, and his figure became very tall as he transformed into a demon. Demons were strange existences that existed between soul and matter. So Mordor reached out and grabbed the energy whip, pulling Strange toward him. Strange raised the runic shield created by magic, but Mordor's huge demonic claws easily penetrated the runic shield, pierced through Strange's chest, and grabbed his soul. Strange felt the immense and blazing pain coming from his soul, and could not help but cry out in pain. But looking at Mordor's ferocious head, he laughed in pain. "Mordor, I will watch you fall into darkness with my own eyes." Mordor showed a puzzled look, and then felt his body suddenly being torn apart. An unparalleled power penetrated the indestructible body of the demon, and a wave of weakness from his soul spread throughout his body. Unmatched, unstoppable, and powerless to escape, the body of a demon created by magic was easily torn apart like a piece of paper in a level 18 typhoon. Morton fell. He struggled to turn his head and saw a young man floating in the air. Kong Keenan casually imprisoned Mordor, and Strange heard the angry roar of Mordor's soul. "Strange, you actually betrayed the honor of mages in a duel." Strange panted, feeling the burning pain from his soul, and bared his teeth. "Mordor, when you appeared alone, you should have thought of the risk of being defeated one by one. Yes, why can't the side of justice use tactics to separate you, surround you, and eliminate you one by one? First remove the wings, and then attack the core in one fell swoop. This is the strategy of the Holy Shield Brotherhood against you. You don't deserve to be heroes," Mordor's soul said weakly. Kong Keenan's face was full of righteousness. "Dr. Strange, don't talk about morality with criminals. We enforcers don't do that." As a hero, Strange still could not get used to the powerful logic of the ruling state's violent organization. As a soldier of the Republic of Republic, an enforcer, and a liberator, the style of the state's violent organization had been engraved into Kong Keenan's bones. He was used to using the power of the state to crush criminals. Chapter 1076. "Are you sure he won't cause us any trouble?" Steve looked at Johnny Blaze's photo. It was a picture of Johnny Blaze riding a stunt motorcycle and leaping over dozens of trucks. There were also some photos of a skeleton knight riding a flaming motorcycle that had been washed with a special potion. If a man sells his soul to the devil, freedom has nothing to do with him. Chen Ong leaned back in his office chair and tidied up his personal belongings that the PRL had sent over. "Don't think that Johnny Blaze is a hero or an anti-hero just because he killed a lot of bad guys and judged their souls. In fact, he's just a puppet driven by the devil. His conscience is just a tool the devil uses to play with his soul. So his position doesn't matter. What matters is Mephito's position. That devil can't be on our side." Steve sighed. Chen Ong carefully hung a hockey mask on the wall and said, "So, we have to pull out its claws and teeth first. The souls that Mephito's tempted are mainly in Europe. The PRL and the European community will be responsible for dealing with them. In the new continent, although Mephito's is not as deeply rooted as in old Europe and has many trump cards, there is no doubt that the number of worshippers controlled by the devil is still astonishing. When I was in the insurance business in America, I dealt with some cults that worshipped him, so I know a lot about this." Steve curiously picked up an old-fashioned videotape and casually asked, "What did you send Dr. Strange and Kong Keenan to do?" "Deal with his senior brother. Let them handle Kamartaj's family matters themselves. I sent Kong Keenan just in case. In case Strange is unwilling to kill his senior brother. You'd better put down that videotape." Steve put it in front of him and observed it carefully, but he did not find anything wrong. "What's so special about it?" "This is a sealed meme carrier. There's some bad information recorded in it. I can show it to you. Then, at midnight, you'll receive some special phone calls. 7 days later, a woman will come to your door to comfort you. Be careful. If the meme leaks out, it'll be very troublesome to seal it again. You've collected a lot of weird stuff." Steve picked up another glass jar. He looked into the jar and saw some humus soil. There seemed to be some tiny insects crawling in it. He asked curiously, "What is this?" There was a serious case of parasitic infection at JFK International Airport. All the passengers on the plane were infected and died. Later, the insurance company sent me to deal with the insurance issues of the passengers on the plane. After investigation, it was found that the parasite originated from an undeclared piece of luggage on the plane, a wooden coffin that had just been excavated. The parasite came from there. Later, we had to burn the entire plane. We also sent planes to use incendiary bombs to clean up the soil at the place where the coffin was found, completely eliminating the possible source of infection. This is the last sample of the rotten soil in the coffin. It contains the parasite protozoa. We can't let it come into contact with the human body. Steve was shocked. "We should get rid of this thing. You can't just store it in a completely unprotected glass bottle." "Don't worry. It can't be any safer now." Chen Ong hammered the glass jar hard, startling Steve. He laughed and said, "You think this is a glass jar? No, even a tank isn't as strong as this." Steve took out another envelope. He waved it at Chen Ong and asked, "What's this dangerous thing?" "It's an ordinary envelope. There's only the most ordinary note in the envelope. On the note there's a name and a fear about it. It's nothing at all. It's just the name of a good old man on Elm Street. If you want to take it away, I can also give you a hockey mask that embodies motherly love." "You also collect dolls?" Steve took out a very old plastic doll covered in wounds and dust. "Is this something like a voodoo doll from Voodoo?" "It does look like it. I've been studying how it gained life and soul. Voodoo wizards are just a hypothesis, but it hasn't come into contact with the history of voodoo magic." Chen Ong explained to Steve while carefully placing several parchment books and bamboo slips on the bookshelf. Steve put down the doll and noticed a flower pot on the windowsill. Inside it was an orchid with straight stems and orange flowers. "I've never seen this plant before. The Stairway of the Sun. It was just rescued from the Ndapaya ruins a few days ago." "Should I put it here?" Steve asked. Chen Ong poured water on it and said, "There's some in the lab, but I think it should be exposed to sunlight, so I brought one to the office. Maybe it can protect against radiation?" As Chen Ong placed the Stairway of the Sun beside the computer, the flower of the Stairway of the Sun, that was originally facing the sun, suddenly turned towards the computer. Steve noticed that Chen Ang's computer screen suddenly changed. In that instant, he discovered that the Stairway of the Sun seemed to be connected to the internet. Steve leapt up from his chair. "There's something wrong with this thing." He told Chen Ong yes. "It's gathering information online." Chen Ong replied calmly. "It's a famine variant. You're just going to leave it defenseless beside the computer?" Steve anxiously asked. Chen Ong didn't mind. "Steve, when this plant was plundered from the Ndapaya tribe, you should already know that it's out of control. We only have a small portion of its remnant roots here, while Thanos and his allies have thousands of times more. The worst has already happened. Do you think I'm absolutely safe just because I've carefully guarded this thing? Right now, it's more important to understand them. It's precisely because I've come into contact with them that I understand that the stairway of the sun is actually a species with collective consciousness. This stairway of the sun of mine is merely an insignificant tentacle of their collective consciousness. Right now, it can only communicate with the computer. But if it's this plant, it's like a gigantic signal receiver that can receive global electromagnetic waves. Their complex neural network can be connected to our network. I've already identified their unique network signals and sent them to the ICLEINS HIEL D for them to lock onto these signals and strengthen their defenses so as to prevent more confidential information from leaking out. You should be thankful that this plant hasn't fully awakened. Its signal reception is still instinctive and doesn't have any technology to speak of. But once it truly awakens, it can actively manipulate electromagnetic signals and is fully capable of invading any network on Earth. As long as it has wireless signals. Steve was speechless. He saw Chun-Ong place a specimen labeled Fujiang in Japanese, a jar of meat in a corrosive liquid, on a shelf. He reached for the camera and briefcase next to him and said to Steve, "Take your shield. Let's go meet that Johnny Blaze." Chun-Ong picked up a shabby voodoo doll, patted the dust off it and said, "Bring it along. I want to see what special characteristics the soul of the famous Ghost Rider has." "You plan to seal his soul into this doll?" Steve picked up the divine shield and put it on his back. He looked at Chun-Ong, who had a camera around his neck, glasses, and a briefcase under his arm. He looked like a reporter, but he was holding an irrelevant rag doll in his hand. Steve felt very awkward. "Yes," Chun-Ong said. "Since it's an evil spirit, we have to be careful and seal it. This voodoo doll is a trophy I left behind when I cleaned up the wizards in Haiti a few years ago. The soul of the witch's heart demon was sealed here in the past. Later, it was consumed during an experiment. Speaking of which, it seems that half of Jonathan Blaze's soul is still mine." Chun-Ong thought to himself, "I'll have to go through the experiment records of the Spirit of Vengeance when I get back. In any case, whether it's the batch I made or the one that naturally reproduced. Mephitos used my property as an experimental subject. All humans are my property, so there's no doubt that I have ownership of the soul in his hands. It's decided happily. I'll ask him for it back when I have time." Chapter 1077. Texas. Johnny Blaze, whom Chun-Ong and Steve were looking for, was performing stunts here. Today, Johnny Blaze's performance was in the countryside of Texas. The rednecks here were conservative, which made the traditional circus more popular. It was conservative, rural, backward, and the Texans were ignorant and grumpy. This was the Lone Star Republic of rednecks, racists, and the KKK. This should be the best place to preserve the American tradition. Chun-Ong leaned against the stands with a bottle of beer in his hand, ignoring the fiery circus in front of him. He asked Rogers next to him, "Do you feel a familiar smell?" "I'm a northerner," Steve said. Although the Federation has been bridging the conflict between the North and the South after the Civil War, a northerner can never truly agree with the spirit of the South. I prefer an open America, not a puritanical conservative country. So, yes, I'm not interested." Chun-Ong raised his beer, clinked glasses with Steve, and drank. "One last question. What's the real reason you've been letting Ebony Throat do what he wants?" Steve asked. Chun-Ong silently tapped his finger on the railing in front of him. After thinking for a long time, he told Steve, "You saw through it. Yes, whether it's me or Cyclops, the forces behind us, the Revolutionary Alliance and SHIELD, have been letting Ebony Throat do what he wants. Otherwise, we'd have to deal with him first, not those who have been bewitched by him. But at the same time, we also need him." "What do you need him to do?" Steve suppressed his dissatisfaction and asked, "I don't understand why you always use this and that." "This is politics." Chun-Ong smiled helplessly and said, "We need to use him to muddy the waters, and then after it settles down, we can see more clearly. To put it bluntly, we want to use him to vet some forces that are outside the mainstream. Earth is too complicated. Before we have a showdown with Apocalypse, we need to know the attitudes of those forces. So, Ebony Throat is a fuse, a sign of judgment, a test for other forces, other people, superheroes or villains. We need him to stir up trouble on Earth, stir up those who are hiding in the mud, and let us know their attitudes and positions. Standpoint is very important. They have always avoided establishing their own position, but as a diplomat of the HRL, I and Nick Fury need to determine their position, and then decide who to befriend and who to eradicate. You're treating him like a touchstone. Steve could not tell if he was happy or angry. He just said calmly, "You want him to help you find the enemies you need to eliminate one by one? Before the final battle, we can't allow their faces to be blurred." Chen-Ong nodded. "For example, Johnny Blaze. He's actually Ghost Rider's representative. We need to find out Ghost Rider's stance through him. Was he a chess piece completely under the control of that demon Mephisto's? Furthermore, it was a party with its own will. Their attitude, their stance, their affiliation." Chen-Ong pointed at Johnny Blaze, who had attracted a lot of cheers when he appeared. "This is the tacit understanding between me and Nick. So we're here to test his stance?" Steve asked. "A better way to put it is to assess his threat," Chen-Ong said softly, then put down the bottle and applauded loudly in the direction of Johnny Blaze, who was about to cross the ring of fire and the high platform. Steve wanted to ask more clearly, but he was interrupted by the surrounding crowd. In the midst of the cheers, Johnny Blaze jumped up, crossed the huge barrier between the high platforms, and landed successfully. The atmosphere at the scene became even more enthusiastic. The audience shouted excitedly at Johnny Blaze. Watching Johnny Blaze leave the stage surrounded by the staff, Chen-Ong and Steve had to get up and quietly walk backstage. "Sorry. This is not allowed." Before the staff could finish, he was forced back by two special IDs with eagle emblems. "We have some things to ask Johnny Blaze," Steve said. Please come in." The staff was a little hesitant and stammered. He stepped aside and emphasized, "Johnny Blaze is a popular stunt driver here. He didn't cause any trouble, did he? We just have some things to ask him alone." Steve had to comfort him. "It's nothing serious." After getting off the racing track, Johnny Blaze sat alone backstage, reading a religious book. Chen-Ong walked up to him, glanced at the title of the book, then sat opposite him and said, "You can't find out the true nature of God by reading this kind of book." Johnny raised his head and looked at him in surprise. Chen-Ong continued, "You have to talk to him personally." "You have something to talk to me about?" Johnny put down the book, glanced at him, and then turned to look at Steve, who was wearing a cowboy hat and leaning against the side with his head lowered. Because Steve was too well known, or in other words, there were very few people in the United States who did not know him, so it was Chen-Ong who was talking to him. "Let's talk." Chen-Ong put a bottle of wine on the table. "Let's talk about Mephitos." Johnny Blaze was instantly alerted, and a strong sense of vigilance rose in his heart towards Chen-Ong. He whispered, "Why did you mention this demon?" For someone who had just experienced a thrilling performance, and when he stopped, he was still holding Faust in his arms. Isn't it natural to talk about this topic? What's more, only by coming into contact with the demon can one get closer to God. Chen-Ang's words had a double meaning. Are you really so free that you don't watch the circus outside and talk about religion with people in the middle of the night? Johnny Blaze questioned. What's more, God is getting further and further away from me. I can't see him for a long time. Believe me, you've never been so close to him, Chen-Ong said calmly. Then what is Mephitos? Johnny asked. The question that God uses to test people is also the weapon that God uses to test humans. Legend has it that ancient Babylon once built the Tower of Babel in an attempt to ascend to heaven on its own. God made it so that people could not speak and could not unite. Probably from that time there were demons, so Babylon fell under the hands of the demons. From this, we can see that angels and demons are both God's creations. Chen Ong looked at Johnny Blaze's slightly more serious expression and chose to continue. I also know a little more. In some absurd legends, the Creator will give people all kinds of tests to determine if they are His most perfect creations. Thus, when every civilization develops to its most prosperous stage, it will face challenges. When the humans on Earth built the Tower of Babel, the Creator's adopted Son, the Messiah, came to the world. He collected the darkest part of human souls and ignited it with fire. The burning soul became the spirit of vengeance. They swept the earth and interrogated the souls of humans. Thus, the Tower of Babel collapsed, the tribulation fire fell from the sky, and the raging waves of Nabistan came. Babylon perished. The spirit of vengeance burned the sins of humans. From the original sins of humans, 7 powerful spirits of vengeance were born. They sank into the abyss and burned into a hell of fire. They far surpassed their own kind, so they were given an identity by the Messiah. They judged the souls of sinners on his behalf and interrogated the original sins of humans. They were called demons and devils. Mephithus was one of them. But interestingly, demons were once a test for humans, but they were also the creations of the Creator. Then, here's the interesting thing. According to the rules, when demons are strong enough to attract the attention of the Creator, they also have to face their own test. So, the demons that were created to test humans also had to accept the test. This is truly an interesting irony. But the demons didn't think this was an irony. On the contrary, they were very afraid. Mephithus was the same. Thus, an internal war between them occurred. Every demon and devil wanted to seize power from their own kind and at the same time reduce the overall strength of the demons and devils to delay the arrival of the test. After the war, some demons and devils failed, while others became stronger. But they were still afraid. So they wanted to explore the secret of the Messiah's creation, the original secret of the demons, in case the Messiah took away their power with a wave of his hand. Thus, they chose to search again. The spirit of vengeance. Some unfortunate humans were chosen as the carriers of the spirit of vengeance because of the characteristics of their souls. These humans were called Ghost Riders. Chapter 1078. Actually, we've dealt with each other before. Chen Ong leaned back in his chair and relaxed. St. Milica Church, the San Venganza contract. You and your girlfriend Roxanne got into big trouble. She actually had a huge insurance policy on her. That was 10 years ago. Who would buy insurance from a communist country on the other side of the Pacific Ocean? At that time, I was the only insurance investigator in North America, and the total annual business was less than that of a small town in China. Realization dawned on Johnny Blaze. He pointed at Chen Ong and said, "You're the insurance investigator." Roxanne told me that she later went to handle the investigation procedures for insurance fraud. After all, the Insurance Regulatory Agency in America doesn't accept compensation for being kidnapped by a demon. Chen Ong spread his hands. She's been insured by your company, Johnny Blaze said. But I don't remember meeting her. After all, our company recognizes compensation for mysterious and supernatural injuries. Many customers become our company's regular customers after coming into contact with that. No one wants to die without knowing why. When I arrived to investigate, you'd already gone to save her. So I didn't meet her, but I saw Carter, the previous Ghost Rider. I witnessed his negotiation with Mephithus. This old guy always wanted to exchange his soul for it, and agreed to many harsh conditions for it, but he failed in the end. A few years later, I saw him in hell. He's not doing well now. He changed the contract to a fake one, and almost killed Roxanne, Johnny Blaze said angrily. But he also tricked the witch devil. After being seriously injured by your trial's eye, the witch devil came back to find us. It wanted to kill the old and weak Ghost Rider and take back the contract. But it didn't know that Carter had already made a deal with Mephitos and took back its youth. We worked together to kill it to prevent it from resurrecting in hell. You know, demons can't be killed easily. I trapped it in a voodoo doll, and it died a few years ago because of an accident. What kind of accident can kill a demon? Johnny Blaze didn't believe it. Even the trials I can only banish them. Didn't the spirit of vengeance that accompanied you claim to be indestructible? Chin Ong said, you should know very well that there's another soul in your body, a vengeful soul burning with hellfire. But in the 1950s in Tibet, there was a ghost rider known as Nima who fought against the invaders and protected the slave masters. The trials I caused his soul to be judged, and even the spirit of vengeance in his body was destroyed. Johnny Blaze was silent. The spirit of vengeance that accompanied him told him that it was true. Carter also told me about Ghost Rider. Something about signing a contract with Morpheus. Ghost Rider's mission was to bring those evil souls back to hell. But there's something you might not be clear about? Johnny Blaze frowned. What? Many of his words are wrong. For example, Ghost Rider didn't have to sign a contract with Morpheus to be born. Instead, Morpheus had used the contract to control many Ghost Riders. You've always thought that your power comes from that demon. Yes, part of it is, but most of it actually comes from the spirit of vengeance in your body. Is that the story you just told me? Johnny Blaze asked. Ghost Rider is the predecessor of the demon? Created by God? No. Ghost Rider was created by the demon, and the spirit of vengeance was created by the Messiah. Morpheus combined the spirit of vengeance with the human soul, and used the human soul's sin, weakness, and complexity to corrupt the purity of the spirit of vengeance. In other words, the demon corrupted and controlled your soul, and then used it to control the spirit of vengeance, in order to achieve his own goals. If the dependents created by the Messiah are called angels, then the spirit of vengeance was created by the Messiah to judge and test the Babylonians' provocation against the Creator. After the angel of vengeance destroyed Babylon, the 7 most outstanding ones were given a mission, to test and judge the souls of sinners forever. They were the 7 lords of hell later, the primeval demons. After that, because of the war, they split into 2 camps, demons and devils. They devoured each other, and the strong preyed on the weak. The weak primeval demons were all sealed, including the one that became your spirit of vengeance, Zathanos. Morpheus defeated Zathanos and took his power, but there was still a part of Zathanos' power that Morpheus couldn't take, so he thought of a way. At the very beginning, after the spirit of vengeance was created by the Messiah, they could devour each other, but after becoming a demon, he lost this ability. And he also wanted to know the secret of the Messiah's creation, so he used Zathanos' soul as the spirit of vengeance. It was originally one of the most powerful spirits of vengeance. He bestowed the spirit of vengeance, Zathanos, on his dependents, and then continuously corrupted and controlled it through human souls, discovering its secret. This is where you came from. The spirit of vengeance didn't belong to Morpheus, but you did. The part of Ghost Rider that belonged to you was the part that was corrupted by Morpheus. On the contrary, the part that you thought belonged to the devil was actually an angel. The devil was an angel and an archangel at that. But after the betrayal of the devils, their angel identity was corrupted. But Morpheus stripped Zathanos of the power of the devil and restored him to the original spirit of vengeance. It was precisely this corruption that allowed him to return to his angel identity and become the most powerful spirit of vengeance. What you said is very interesting, but there's no evidence. Johnny Blaze pretended to be nonchalant, concealing his shock. You think those monsters burning with hellfire are angels? What do you think angels are? Chen Nong asked. Those winged humanoid angels with wings on their backs and infinite holy light and majesty? That's a matter of the New Testament. After a legion that belonged to Sephiroth was transferred to the vicinity of Earth, matters related to Earth's religion were handed over to them to handle, so the angels became them. They were actually subordinate to the Plague Legion. Star spirits, the souls of stars. And in the Old Testament, when the Messiah was still directly interfering with Earth, the angels were those monsters. A lump of flesh with countless eyes and tentacles, a ray of pure light, a bubble without any shape, or a lion, an eagle, a calf, or even a wheel, an incomparably huge wheeled aircraft that looked like a star. Chapter 1079. If the demons are angels, Johnny Blaze objected. They can't even enter the church. Because they have sinned, Chen said. So they are punished by the Messiah. Because they tempt people to fall and sin. Johnny Blaze asked. God gave them the duty to judge sinners, but they tempt people to fall? No. You misunderstood me. First of all, God didn't give them the duty. It's the Messiah. God didn't do anything. He just created the Creator. And the Messiah is the one who arranged everything. You can also call it fate. It's not the demons' sin to tempt people's souls to fall. In fact, it's their duty. They created demons to divide and punish humans. Entrapment is also law enforcement. Their real sin is to kill each other and plunder power because they fear the judgment of the future. The Messiah appointed 7 ancient demons, but they harmed each other. This is a challenge to the Messiah's arrangement, so they are guilty. They betrayed the Messiah's arrangement for them. No leader will care if you cross the line a little bit, or should I say, exceed the line in gray areas. Only when the leader wants to deal with you will it be evidence of your crime. However, every leader will care if you challenge the authority of others. That's why they are unlucky. And, if you want evidence, the evidence is in what you just said. Chen said, staring at him. Johnny Blaze recalled what he had just said, and still did not understand. Chen had to remind him. You just said that demons and devils can't enter the church. In fact, based on my experience dealing with the rampant cults in North America, even the devil's kin can't enter the church. Only their worshippers, demon believers who have not been assimilated by their power, can enter. But you can come and go freely in the church. This is a very obvious proof that you are partly an angel, even if you are an angel of vengeance. So, God didn't give up on me, Johnny Blaze said excitedly. He didn't give up on my father either. Will his soul go to heaven? Wait a minute. God didn't give up on anyone. No one will give up on their property. I guarantee that you will belong to him from head to toe, from soul to body. But he just doesn't care. You're just small amounts of money. He's not a saver either. He didn't store your souls in heaven. God is a financial manager who likes to invest and to constantly operate his asset. Therefore, your souls will generally continue to be invested into the operation. Continuous investment, savings and whatnot, there is no such thing. This is not in line with the principles of financial management. You just said that the spirit of vengeance is an angel. So, Chen flipped through the little notebook and said, you belong to Messiah's operations management. It's the capital that temporarily belongs to him. What about the church? Johnny Blaze still wanted to say something. Whether the soul belonged to God or not was very important to believers. Although Johnny Blaze was not a believer, as a traditional American and Southerner, he still cared about this. This was also why he was so determined to get his father's soul back. From this, it could be seen that the capital that Messiah helped Chen manage was indeed developing well, and the management level was very high. For example, Apocalypse Chen himself, his management level was very low. In Messiah's hands, humans were happy to become his property, but in Apocalypse's hands, the property resisted very fiercely. Of course, there was also the reason why Apocalypse's investments were different. Apocalypse's capital was used for experiment. Small things like capital appreciation had always been handled by managers like Messiah. The 4 horsemen were the functional heads of Apocalypse's company, and the specific matters were handled by them. In fact, Chunong felt that Messiah did a good job. The inferior asset that originally had no experimental value, the monkey, had become a high-quality asset with high experimental value, humans. The speed of appreciation could be said to be very fast. Messiah could be said to be very capable. Chunong solemnly taught him, "The church is not managed by God. Let me ask you, who is worshipped in the middle of the church? Who is hanging on the cross? Who established the church? Who is the one who redeems humanity?" "My Lord Jesus," Johnny Blaze replied. "That's right. What temple, what God to worship? A church that worships Jesus, you let God do things. That's not reliable. So, you have to understand your own position. You are controlled by Mephitos and have a symbiotic relationship with angels, but in the end, you are a human managed by Messiah. Ownership belongs to God, but control belongs to Messiah." Johnny Blaze was a little confused by Chunong's words. He vaguely felt that there seemed to be nothing wrong with the logic, but from the perspective of his understanding and beliefs from the Bible, these words were almost treasonous. "But God and Jesus are not of this nature," Johnny Blaze emphasized. "You are an administrator in the system, it is not suitable for you to question or object." Chunong tapped the table and said, "You are half an angel. An angel is a spirit in service. Even if you are a civil servant of God, as a civil servant, it is not suitable for you to mention matters of faith. How faith is a matter for believers, to put it bluntly, it is a matter for humans. Humans' understanding of Messiah. Is this something an angel like you should mention? Believers can question whether God is benevolent or not, and whether Messiah is bright or not, but what are you, an angel, questioning? When God sends you to test humans, you also have to ask, isn't this in line with the spirit of the Bible? Which side are you going to sit on? Humans will die sooner or later, so you won't end up as a human. Then, when there is a conflict between the identity of an angel and a human, how are you going to recognize your own position? Johnny Blaze's mind was a mess, and he felt as if his worldview was shattering. I am a ghostwriter, a human who signed a contract with a demon, born and raised as a human. How did I become an angel? For the sake of life and death in heaven, shut up. Putting away the random thoughts in his mind, Johnny Blaze said woodenly, how do you think I should recognize my own position? Of course, your position belongs to whichever side your butt is on. Humans are just a temporary stool for your butt to sit on, and angels are your seat for life. After you die, Messiah will deal with you according to God's position. How should I recognize the decision in my heart? Johnny Blaze asked. What's the difference between the positions of an angel and a human? Chunong picked up his beer and said, I'll just ask you one thing. God wants Armageddon. Do you support it? Johnny Blaze was speechless. Destroy the world. Kill all humans and create another world. According to the Old Testament, there aren't many people in the Book of the Lamb. Of course, that's not the case in reality. But Armageddon is a topic you can never avoid. Are you going to judge humans as an angel on behalf of God, or are you going to be judged as a human? You see, there's a huge conflict between identities, Chunong said. For example, the avenging angel was ordered to destroy Babylon and the Tower of Babel. This is the job of an angel. A person can have a position, but as an angel, your position must be the same as God's. I don't know. Johnny Blaze hugged his head and said, I don't know what to do. Are you here to ask me this as an angel? He looked up and asked, You shouldn't be asking me this. Are you here to ask me this as an angel? He looked up and questioned, You shouldn't be asking me this. I'm God, I can't ask. Chunong looked up at the sky speechlessly. I'm not an angel. I'm just here to ask you your attitude as an organization that protects humans, Chunong said. Do you know? Mephithus joined an alliance that tried to destroy half of the life in this universe? Their first step was to prepare to destroy humanity. And you're the most powerful ghost rider controlled by Mephithus. So I need to know, as a member of the human race and a soul controlled by Mephithus, what's your stance? Furthermore, as half of you are angels and half of you are humans, what is your stance in the later judgment day? God is preparing Armageddon, and humans are going to resist. Do you support it? Johnny Blaze said dejectedly, I can't answer these questions in a short period of time. We don't care about your answer, because the answer will always change. I just want you to know your actual actions will be your final answer. After we step out of this circus, an old man with a silver cane will walk in. He will invite you to save the universe, and the first step will be to destroy us. And when you appear on the battlefield, we will determine our attitude toward you and all the Ghost Riders. Think about it carefully. Chen Ong stood up and said, You'll eventually come face to face with us, but if your will wants to resist Mephithus, we'll help you get rid of its control. If not, then we're enemies. After saying this, Chen Ong turned to meet up with Steve and walked out of the circus. What did you say to him? Steve asked. I heard a lot of secrets about religion. You actually think that Apocalypse is the real God? He's not. To angels, he is. The Human Revolutionary Alliance isn't afraid of a galactic warlord. Thanos is nothing in front of us, even if he has many allies. What we care about is Apocalypse, so this attitude is the most important. As for the others, Johnny Blaze and the other Ghost Riders won't choose Mephithus. They can even resist that demon for a San Venganza contract, not to mention for all of humanity. But in Apocalypse, will those angels, including Mephithus, Satan, and Ghost Riders, rebel against their creator? Although demons and devils have their own stance, it's still hard to say. After all, they've never challenged the Messiah head-on, not even the most rebellious demon. Chapter 1080. The former circular spaceship headquarters of the Holy Spear Bureau was now the eastern base of the Brotherhood of the Holy Shield. Natasha walked into the circular headquarters. This spaceship, which was still of very advanced technology 6 years ago, was now outdated. There were not many people in the headquarters. Most of them were former staff of the Holy Spear Bureau. After the purge, some of the Holy Spear agents who did not pass the investigation chose to continue working here. Natasha was carrying a sealed metal container. Through the blue energy liquid inside, one could see strands of crimson substance swimming in the energy liquid. It was very strange. Coming to the center of the circular headquarters of the Holy Spear Bureau, the researchers had been waiting here for a long time. They took the metal can and put it into a circular machine. Like an armillary sphere, 9 metal rings were interlocked to form a complicated celestial body model. The metal can was locked in the center. After connecting the energy, the 9 metal rings began to rotate slowly. The dark red matter in the metal can began to move along the 2 vertical axes of the machine. It was like dark red lightning jumping on the machine. The researcher in charge of the experiment introduced to Natasha in a low voice, a few years ago, a group of aliens called Dark Elves tried to launch an attack. Natasha nodded. I've heard of it. They wanted to plunge the universe into darkness. Yes. Later, our research found that they are a kind of modified dark matter creature. They only interact with a very small amount of matter in the world that humans perceive. Like shadows, they exist in a different world from us. However, the energy in the material dimension they live in has weakened, and the entire dark world has begun to cool down. We measured the temperature of that dark dimension, and it has reached minus 150 degrees Celsius. That dimension can no longer provide the energy that life needs to survive. Natasha finally understood. No wonder they chose to invade our world. No. At that time, they were unable to invade our world. On the contrary, we helped them, because they were also a test subject of the Apocalypse. They were dark matter creatures created by the Apocalypse. The cold disaster of their universe was actually a disaster of the apocalypse. Out of sympathy, the 9 worlds at that time, including the ancient humans on Earth, worked together to use the reality gem to create a weapon that could interfere with the darkness of matter, ether. It transformed the dark elves and transformed the dark matter that made up their bodies into light, giving them the ability to interfere with our material dimension. Forming the dark elves, the mystical form of semi-dark matter lifeforms. Although we suspect that this might be another one of the heavens apocalypse's experiments, its positive significance is still great. It is a symbol of the 9 nations' united efforts to resist the heavens apocalypse. It was the most glorious era of the 9 great nations. Although this era passed in the blink of an eye, it was destroyed in an apocalypse. But it's still meaningful. After the Republic came to this universe, they found us survivors and restarted our civilization. At that time, the remnants of the Dark Elves tried to use ether to darken the photons of our universe, plundering energy from our physical dimension to restore their homeland, the Dark Dimension. But they were destroyed by the Republic. At the same time, in that war, we also seized that weapon, the ether particles. The Republic has always had rather advanced research on dark energy and dark matter. The ether particle is no secret to us, but the reality gem is a very valuable research material. This is because it can interfere with all matter. It can interact with any dark matter. Through this mystical material, the Republic finally began to delve into the dark matter of our universe, the dark dimension. This is the reality gem. Natasha looked at the mysterious crimson material she had brought. No, the researcher explained. The ether particles have no meaning to us. It might be a powerful weapon created by the 9 worlds to deal with the apocalypse. There are also similar weapons like the icebox, the eternal flame, the Eye of Agamotto, the Tesseract. To those civilizations, they are of course important. They were their strongest weapons at their peak. But to the Republic, they are all outdated. A cannon might be a divine weapon in a primitive society, but in the interstellar era, it can only be placed in a museum. The ether particles are now stored in the history museums of the 9 worlds. After the reality gem thoroughly researched its unique properties and found the essential connection between all matter and energy, perfecting advanced energy and matter physics, its value in research is limited to this. You mean, the Republic has created a more advanced weapon? Natasha exclaimed. It's not a weapon, the researcher said proudly. It's a new field of physics, the dark energy of energetics and the dark dimension of space physics. This field is the study of chaos, which studies the fundamental relationship between all matter and energy. The application of a new subject to military technology is unimaginable. It is not a powerful weapon, nor is it a new type of weapon, but a whole new technological tree. The researcher turned to the armillary machine, and the crimson material spread out like a nebula, bound within the ring, and red and black lightning raged within it. That crimson material is a new element synthesized by the Republic. It is a catalyst and medium for changing the nature of matter and energy, darkening or photolifying them. It is called ether. Now, the Republic's new dimensional warships are equipped with a physical weapon that can change the nature of matter and energy, the ether spectrum, and a mathematical weapon that can interfere with the cosmological constant, the information modulation port. Of course, because the Holy Shield's authority level in the APC is too low, it cannot use the Republic's military weapons. But our researchers have modified a civilian version overnight. It is the armillary sphere in front of you. This name is used to commemorate the founder of the Divine Spear Bureau, Zhang Heng. The armillary sphere can use the ether material to change the nature of matter and energy within a certain range, and it is a weapon of laws. Because of the rush, the power of this armillary sphere can only cover the Earth and Moon system. Natasha smiled sweetly. I think this range is enough. I hope it can help you. The researcher pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose and said with a smile. After returning to the floating pyramid base of the Holy Shield Brotherhood, Natasha found a dispirited Thor. He was holding the broken remains of Mjolnir Moore, looking a little lost. When Natasha found him, she leaned over to Thor and said helplessly, "Thor, that's just a hammer. It's not just a weapon, it's also the symbol of Thor. I still remember the moment I picked it up in front of the people of Asgard, in front of my father. All of Asgard cheered. It recognized my power, and only Thor could pick it up. After I was blinded by pride, it rejected me. It witnessed my growth." Natasha frowned. Thor could not go on a mission with her in this state. She squatted down and said to Thor, "You keep calling him Mjolnir Moore. What does this name mean?" "Thor's hammer." Thor raised his head, a trace of pride still on his face. "So," Natasha asked, "because you picked up Thor's hammer, you became Thor?" "Yes," Thor said with a nostalgic look. "When I picked it up, my father, the king of gods, Odin, gave me the name of Thor. Then this hammer should be called. The one who picks up this hammer is the fated Thor of Asgard. I think the bards and dramatists of Asgard will give it a famous name, such as the Hammer of Blood and Thunder?" Natasha shook her head. "Thor, this hammer became Mjolnir Moore because of you. Because you are Thor, it is Thor's hammer. You are Thor, not hammer. If the one who picks up this hammer is Thor, then the real Thor should be this hammer. If you think so, it's an insult to you, and even to your father, and to Odin's theocracy. You are Odinson, you are Thor, and the hammer you pick up is Thor's hammer." Chapter 1081. Thor got rid of some of the gloominess and lack of confidence after losing his hammer. He stood up and looked at the fragments of Mjolnir on the ground. Seeing this, Natasha put them away and said, "Give me these fragments. I'll get the Revolutionary Alliance to recast it for you. After all, you still lack a suitable weapon." "I can get the dwarves to recast a weapon for me," said Thor. Natasha smiled and said, "The craftsmanship of the Revolutionary Alliance isn't bad. You can't go back to Asgard yet. If Odin thinks you need a weapon, he will throw it in front of you. If he thinks you need to get rid of your dependence on weapons and rebuild your confidence, then you won't get it even if you go." Thor thought about it and realized that it was true. He knew how disappointed his father would be if he lost Mjolnir Moore. Thinking of this, he didn't dare to go back to see Odin. In an underground bar in Los Angeles, psychedelic lights flickered, and intense rhythmic electronic music surged. In this underground bar, located in a hidden corner of the night market in Chinatown, there were drugs, liquor, and an extravagant atmosphere. There were urban men and women in revealing clothes, as well as an underground rock band with extraordinary skills. Underground bars used to be everywhere in the United States, but after the cataclysm in New York, government regulation became stricter. Young men and women who grew up in this decadent era had nowhere to vent their inner confusion. Underground bars that were more hidden, more secure, and more powerful became places for them to express their unbridled youth. The men and women on the dance floor screamed one after another. Several tattooed men in black clothes, who were watching the crowd from a hidden corner, were watching everyone vigilantly. The women on the dance floor were dancing wildly on drugs, the men and women who were in close contact with each other, and sometimes these people would even greedily glare at the naked bodies with beautiful figures, but they would at most take a few glances before moving their eyes away vigilantly and looking at other places. Such quality was comparable to the elite agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. A black man wearing a windbreaker and sunglasses attracted their attention. Whether it was his behavior or attire, his temperament was different from the chaotic atmosphere here. Several men in black bowed their heads and said a few words into their headphones. Immediately, someone pushed aside the revelers who were blocking the way and came to the black man. They put their hands on the man's chest and whispered, "Come with us." It was difficult to understand the voice in the loud music, but they didn't seem to care whether the man heard it or not. They grabbed him and brought him out. They shuttled through the narrow and hidden passageways and came to an office. They brought him in, but surprisingly, other than the boss who was sitting on the chair without saying anything, there were two other people in the office. One of them was wearing a suit, had long blonde hair, and looked like the male lead of the old movie Breaking Point. He was sitting on the desk in front of the boss, facing the boss. The other man was a red-haired woman with a hot and alluring figure, standing elegantly with her back to them. The four men in black who were escorting the black man into the room immediately went on alert. They reached into their chests to grab the guns in their holsters, but the red-haired woman simply smiled at them. Her body bounced up like a flexible rubber rod, and her hair left a trail of red afterimages in the air. A pair of astonishingly tactile thighs clamped around the neck of one of the men in black, and her other hand pressed against the head of another man in black. The men in black erupted with astonishing strength and speed, but it was useless in front of Natasha. Natasha broke the neck of one of the men, then used her bare hands to break the necks of the other two. Finally, with a flick of her leg, a long and slender leg stabbed into the heart of the last man in black. The black man who was brought in was sure that this kick to the heart had definitely shattered the poor fellow's heart into at least 6 pieces. Natasha straightened her back and stood up. The 4 men in black who had fallen to the ground were surprisingly still showing signs of life, and were even recovering. The 3 whose necks had been broken even showed signs of recovery when they turned their heads. Natasha took out a makeup box. She opened the makeup box, and the small makeup mirror inside emitted a bluish-purple high-power searchlight beam. The 4 men in black on the ground trembled violently in the light, their skin covered in dense blisters. They opened their mouths wide and wailed silently. Natasha calmly looked at her watch to calculate the time. 50 seconds later, these people turned into a pool of ashes. Another 10 seconds later, the boss, who had been pressed into a chair by Thor and had all his bones broken, also trembled and turned into flying ash. Natasha closed the makeup box and looked at her watch. 1 minute. He's already an expert among vampires, but he can only last 1 minute under extreme ultraviolet light. Thor said, "Just don't get skin cancer from the sun." Natasha smiled. "This is weapon-grade ultraviolet light, a weapon specially designed for them. The penetrative effect is very strong, and even if it shines on the human body for a long time, it's only equivalent to weak sunlight. The biggest side effect is probably tanning. In fact, it's specially modulated according to the spectrum. For humans, it's harmless and even beneficial for sunbathing, but for these dirty beasts, it's a deadly weapon." The black man found a chair and sat down. "It seems you came here specially to find me. And to do some experiments," Natasha said. "Daywalker Blade, a warrior who's hard to say whether he's human or vampire. When he was a fetus, he was infected by a vampire and mutated. You don't think of yourself as a vampire, but you don't seem to identify with humans either. Compared to those vampires, some humans aren't much better," Blade said. "I don't hunt vampires to protect humans. At first, it was just for revenge, but later it became a mission. I make money and live because I don't know anything else except hunting vampires. So, I'm just a bounty hunter, not a hero. We're here to ask you for a favor," Natasha said frankly. Blade lowered his head and took a cigarette. "I'm not a mercenary. I'm a bounty hunter. You pay the bounty, and if I bring its head, you pay. If I don't bring it, it means I'm not doing this business. There's no promise, only money and goods. We're not here to ask you to kill vampires," Natasha said. "We're here to ask you to do an assessment." Blade was slightly stunned. He said, "Assessment? No one has ever asked me to do that. I've already said, I only know how to hunt those monsters. You're the human who has had the most contact with the vampires. You understand them, hunt them, investigate them. You're the first to notice their every move and every conspiracy. Have there been any unusual movements from the vampires recently?" Natasha projected a bank account, one that Blade was very familiar with. $10,000 for one question. Blade smiled. Frankly, I like the cleanliness of your Hield. By the way, didn't you defect to the Soviet Union? And this alien prince. Even the Avengers are doing this kind of work? Thor tilted his head and observed quietly, not responding to Blade's words. As an Asgardian prince who considered himself a god, he looked down on these vampires, or rather, the pride of the Asgardians made him disdain to answer Blade's words. Blade took a puff of his cigarette and slowly exhaled. They've been doing something big recently. A few families are getting restless. I've found out that they've mobilized a lot of weapons and are wantonly developing their descendants. It's been a long time since they've developed their descendants on such a large scale. I'm here to investigate today. I don't need $10,000 for one question. Give me $1.5 million and I'll tell you everything. Natasha's eyes moved as she looked at the projected account. Instantly, the number changed. Blade had no doubt and smiled. $2 million, that's generous. They're going to make a big news. Many new vampires have been transferred to Africa. Their funds, including the upper echelons they control, are putting pressure on Hield to support a new country called Wakanda. Those old guys think that after the New York incident, the pressure from humans is increasing, and the living space of the vampires is being squeezed. The law enforcement agencies are becoming less afraid of hunting down the lower echelons who don't follow the rules. They want to show off their strength and restore the balance. In short, it's to intimidate the upper echelons of the human race and give them enough living space. Including blood farms and human trafficking, right? Natasha asked. They've become foragers, Blade said. Now let's get down to business, Natasha replied. This question is worth $5 million, and we hope that you can give us a truthful and detailed answer from your point of view. First, we need you to provide a racial assessment of the vampires. Do they have humanity? What is their level of civilization? Their relationship with humans? Most importantly, are they willing to coexist peacefully with humans and accept the punishment of human law, including settling old scores? Is there a possibility for humans and vampires to coexist peacefully? Blade took a deep breath and slowly exhaled a ring of smoke. Every vampire is guilty of the most heinous crimes. They are a type of monster, not a race. They may look elegant, but their desire for blood has warped their humanity. When they were alive, a group of inhumane beasts who feed on humans, they will not hesitate to bite open the neck of the most innocent child and suck them dry. They despise humans. The only reason they know their place is because they fear the power of humans, and not because they want peace. Yes, the vampires are divided into two factions, the demon faction and the secret faction. However, the only difference between them is that the secret faction wishes to enjoy a life of hunting and preying in secret, carrying out their evil deeds. The demon faction wishes to establish a terrifying order led by the vampires, to create a world where humans are bred. One of them chooses to live as a parasite among humans, and the other chooses to replace humans as the master. Can humans and vampires coexist? Of course, as long as you can watch innocent people being harmed and watch the hidden crimes of the vampires. They are willing to compromise and hide. But to make the vampires give up, hunt humans, and even pay the price for their crimes, that is impossible. In summary, after understanding the state of civilization and racial characteristics of the vampires, the Holy Shield has suggested to carry out genocide measures against them. They no longer have the conditions for civilized coexistence. Natasha returned to the floating pyramid base and began to write the relevant report for the Revolutionary Alliance. The report will be submitted to the Abnormal Biological Hazard and Control Committee for review 2 days later. The review results were sent to the headquarters of the Holy Shield Brotherhood, and the headquarters forwarded it to the Eastern Base. Natasha once again came to the Circle Base and stood in front of the armillary sphere. The researcher glanced at the report, which read, "The committee's opinion is that vampires do not exist in civilization, nor are they a hostile race, but a biological disaster mechanism in human society. They should be artificially corrected and interfered with. Genocide plan approved." The armillary sphere slowly turned, and the researcher said, "This time we will interfere with the physical characteristics of ultraviolet light. Ether will darken part of the ultraviolet spectrum of sunlight shot toward the Earth. Ultraviolet light will be able to penetrate buildings, rocks, magma, and most material elements without loss. Only carbon will be interfered with by ultraviolet light. That is to say, the part of ultraviolet light in sunlight will be like neutron radiation, passing through inorganic materials such as facilities and buildings, and only causing damage to organic matter. But the modulated ultraviolet light is not lethal to humans and plants, or in other words, it is a quasi-weapon against vampires. For other carbon-based creatures on Earth, this is only equivalent to 2 days of extra sunlight. There will be no harm, maybe their skin will turn a little darker, but for vampires, it is like 2 days of soaking in strong acid. Will the Revolutionary Alliance darken ultraviolet radiation on Earth for 2 days? Natasha asked. Yes. The researcher replied. Within 2 days, every corner of the Earth will be exposed to ultraviolet radiation, even in buildings and buried underground. We will do a comprehensive ultraviolet sterilization of the Earth. Will it affect the microbial population? Natasha asked cautiously. We have evaluated. The microbial population is very adaptable. Although the absolute number of some bacteria will be reduced, it will only be a small impact. After 7 days, it will return to normal. Since there is no negative impact, Natasha said, then let's begin. Today, the vampire population around the world was peacefully spending another day. As a long-lived species, they were comfortable, superior, and did not care about this little bit of time, until the Revolutionary Alliance adjusted the light on Earth. They turned on the ultraviolet sterilization light on Earth. Stave, the actual controller of the Stave Consortium in the United States, was an old, white, bald, and fat man who was in charge of the upper class. He looked like a man in his 50s, but his social security records showed that he was in his 70s. However, his real age was already 365 years old. As a high-level vampire, he could wake up in the morning and bask in the sun in a special glass shed that could filter ultraviolet and harmful rays. Then, he would pick up a glass of the blood of a 1982 beauty, which tasted like mellow red wine. For breakfast, Stave only tasted virgins born in 1982. This was because in that year, the astronomical phenomenon of the 9 stars alignment had occurred. The 9 planets of the solar system had vaguely connected into a line, causing the moon's magic tide. Girls born in that year had the best blood quality. Unfortunately, they were almost 40 years old now, and their quality had long begun to decline. It had been 15 years since their best taste period had passed. Only a nostalgic vampire like Stave would be so obsessed with this year. This was also a way for him to show off his status. A 1982 virgin, she had maintained her chastity for 40 years. Among the vampires, only the most powerful existences had such financial and material resources. The lowly vampires are used to drinking the poisoned blood of promiscuous streetwalkers. Only a successful vampire like Stave deserved to drink the blood of 1,982 virgins every day. He quietly admired the beautiful arterial blood color of the cultivated virgins, gently swirling the glass. The blood in the glass hung on the wall of the glass and slowly flowed down, showing off the excellent quality. Chapter 1082. As the sun gradually rose and the warm morning light became hotter, Staff's breakfast time was coming to an end. Usually, at this time, he would stand on the rooftop and look down at the ostentatious and extravagant morning in Los Santos for a while before turning around to deal with the financial group's business for the day. Even a vampire would be very busy after succeeding. Staff was as busy as a president every day, and he indeed had the power of a president. This was the situation of the United States of America. A mere president was nothing. Back when the ace president was still a real estate tycoon, Chairman Staff did not give him any face at all. How dare a small new capitalist compare to the Staff family's 300 years of accumulation? Just like how Jews would band together in economic activities, so would vampires, and they had a much stronger advantage than Jews. Before World War II, Jews were exploited by governments and capitalists, but vampires had already infiltrated the upper class of humans 5,000 years ago. At that time, various noble families in Europe were deeply infiltrated by vampires, to the point that humans had to rely on various religious activities of the church to maintain their social purity. As everyone knew, vampires were not allowed to participate in Catholic religious activities. This could be traced back to the Egyptian pharaoh who was bewitched by a certain high priest and cursed by the Messiah, as well as a certain angel of the Plague Legion who fell under the tricks of humans and was dismembered by the angels. There were also vampires created by the ancient evil gods, and the unique mutation of the primitive virus of the Ebola tribe. In a sense, they were all targets of the Messiah. The evil gods were the enemies of the Messiah. They were created by the Creator and were the complete opposite of the Messiah. The angel of plague was a traitor of the Messiah and was ordered to be dismembered. The hatred between a certain Egyptian high priest and the apocalypse was as deep as the sea, and he swore to resist the fate imposed on him by the apocalypse. Although the primitive virus of the Ebola tribe was a part of the Plague Knights, when the angel of the Plague Legion betrayed them, he stole some of the power of the primitive virus and induced the vampire virus. The four origins of vampires in this world, the evil gods, the Egyptian curse, the angel virus, and the decaying parasites, were all hated by the Messiah. Therefore, it might not be groundless to say that vampires were hated by God. After all, God had once modified many types of vampires, and Adam had personally created the radiation blood clan, which used radiation as a source of power. But the fact that Christ the Son of God detested vampires was not entirely baseless gossip. After Rome, the Western world became a Catholic Christian civilization. Perhaps it had something to do with the threat of vampires. In the Roman Republic era, many chief citizens were related to vampires. In the Roman Empire era, many Roman emperors chose the embrace for the sake of immortality. At the very least, Nero had a close relationship with vampires. Although Nero himself was a demon contractor, among his Roman officials and nobles, there were so many vampires that they could hold a blood clan conference in the palace. As an existence with such deep roots in the Western world, after the Industrial Revolution, they were the first to devote themselves to business and finance, reaping a large amount of the benefits of the Industrial Revolution. During the subsequent world wars, they were international capital without borders, coexisting with each other. After the war, the international capital shifted to the United States and deeply influenced and controlled the country. Needless to say, the political and economic power of vampires was like a parasite growing in the capital world, deeply rooted from the brain to the limbs. Many people referred to bankers as vampires. Most of the time, this was the literal meaning. S-H-I-E-L-D could deal with the aliens who invaded the Earth, the rulers of different time and space, the supervillains who were lucky enough to obtain power, and even the powerful Hydra that had been lurking since ancient Egypt, but it could not deal with the vampires who fed on humans. Because, in a sense, the vampires were the country, or at least the country's economy. Capital vampires like Stave, who controlled powerful financial groups, were not a minority in this country. They were the huge shadow of the iceberg under the sea. So Stave could see the power of humans. He saw how the Avengers fought against the Thanos, who were thousands of times more powerful than their race, but he was not worried that they would attack him. Sometimes, people could fight against opponents who were much stronger than them, but they could not do anything to the little parasites in their brains. When Staff was looking down at Los Santos, he felt his skin itch from the sunlight that had filtered out the radiation harmful to vampires. It was like the feeling of a slightly acidic liquid corroding a person's skin. It was a weak but persistent itch. Staff's expression instantly turned gloomy. In order to let himself bask in the sun every day, he had invested nearly $1 billion in research on how to remove harmful radiation from the sun. He had created this special glass that could filter ultraviolet rays and built this glass greenhouse. But now, this glass greenhouse that was worth $1 billion had a problem. Stave was furious. He was ready to call the person in charge to come up and scold him. He wanted to lock the low-level vampire in this glass greenhouse for a day and let it have a taste of the power of the sun at noon. The glass greenhouse could only protect vampires on cloudy days or in the morning when the sun was not so strong. At noon, even with the protection of the special glass, it was still harmful. It was equivalent to a human being soaked in a weak acidic solution for an entire day, but just as these thoughts flashed through Stave's mind, the vampire's excellent motion capture ability allowed him to see the white smoke coming from the skin on his hand. Then, although there were age spots, his well-maintained skin began to rapidly fester and burn as if it was stuck to a red iron plate. Stave could not help but scream in pain from a sudden burst of pain. Another unruly person wants to harm me. This was the only thought in Stave's mind. Then, he quickly bounced up, his fat body turning into a black shadow with indescribable agility and leaping into the room. Stave looked old and fat, but that was just a disguise. In fact, his physical strength was far superior to that of a human's. He still thought that someone had done something to the glass to harm him. Once he returned to the shadows, he would be safe. In reality, he still maintained his vigilance. No one would think that such a small trick could defeat a high-level blood race, so the opponent must have some tricks up their sleeve. But when he stepped into the room, he did not see any tricks from his opponent. Instead, he saw his subordinates, descendants, low-level blood race, and blood thralls all screaming. All of Stave's bodyguard team and personal affairs team were in a mess. Stave could still feel the pain of being scorched by the sun. His face had already festered into a puddle of rotten flesh. The corpses of some low-level blood race members lay in a puddle on the ground, as if they had been corroded by strong acid. Their flesh and blood had turned to mush and were still bubbling and smoking. This was not an enemy plot, but a genocide by the IPR. No, no. Stave bit down on the neck of his beautiful female secretary, greedily sucking the blood of this cutie who had graduated from a famous Ivy League university. Through sucking the blood, the festering on his body got better, but his condition did not improve at all. The damage caused by the sun was still happening. Healing the wounds by sucking blood only brought more pain. In order to survive, Stave and his trusted vampires slaughtered the humans under his command in a frenzy. But as time passed, the number of humans that could sustain his life became fewer and fewer. He could only pick up a fat, fair-skinned middle-aged man that he had originally disdained. This man was his personal accountant. Stave bit down on the man's carotid artery and controlled the speed at which he sucked blood. He turned into a black shadow and dashed downstairs. There were many employees who served him downstairs, but they were no longer his trusted subordinate. The humans there did not know his true identity. If he was exposed in front of them, even Stave would be in big trouble. But now that he had to survive, he could not care less about this. Most of the vampires under him had turned into a pool of mud, and some had even turned into ashes. Time was of the essence. A middle-level vampire could not bear the pain of being scorched by the sun and jumped down from the top of a 56-story building. At this height, even a vampire would be smashed into a pool of mud. If it was at night, he could have waited for his body to heal, then attacked a few passers-by and wiped his mouth dry. But now he did not have this chance. With all the bones in his body broken, he could only lie on the ground, letting the sun evaporate his flesh and blood. The crowd around him was screaming, and everyone was watching in horror. Fresh flesh and blood ran around him, but he could only watch as his body continued to melt and evaporate. Finally, amidst the horror of the passers-by, he melted and evaporated, leaving only black ashes where he stood. Stave, who had jumped down to the staff office on the lower level, had already melted into a bloody pulp. His flesh and blood were mixed together, hanging on his skeleton like wet mud. When he jumped out, his appearance was second to none in terms of horror and disgust. The weak employees screamed and desperately tried to get away from him. But Stave could no longer move. He stretched out his hand and grabbed at the fresh bags of blood. It was only a few meters, but it was like a heavenly moat, unreachable. His legs had already melted, and his whole body was paralyzed on the ground. He stubbornly reached out towards the person who gave off the smell of fresh blood that he desired. Finally, Stave's body emitted sparks, and he turned into ashes in front of everyone. The terrified employees took out their phones with trembling hands and recorded this short video. A few minutes later, it would appear on YouTube and Facebook, accompanied by the self-righteous comments of those insignificant and ignorant humans. The arrogant Stave, the noble high-ranking blood clan, had become his food and after-dinner entertainment. Chapter 1083. At the same time, the vampires who were ready to come out to hunt in the dusk of Southeast Asia were in a much more miserable state than their kind in Europe and North America. Their originally leisurely days were interrupted by the arrival of the behemoth China, which was the People's Revolutionary Alliance. In the Southeast Asian region, under the protection of the Republic, countless energetic social organizations and these monsters who had mingled with humans were destroyed. Now they could only live in the gray world of Bangkok, relying on the blood of drug addicts, gambling addicts, and drunkards to sustain their lives. Now, the poor people in Bangkok looked around their low shacks in horror. Those who were clearly not to be trifled with were wailing and rolling on the ground, leaving pieces of flesh and blood on the ground. Then, the flesh and blood were quickly dehydrated, and the flesh and blood were reduced to carbon. After these people were done burning, the poor people who were secretly watching them would pry open the doors of their houses and sweep away all the things inside. Those who were a little careless simply swept away the ashes on the ground and moved their bedding inside. The European community retained some of the institutions of the original government. They borrowed from a structure known as the Political Consultative Conference in the Republic and put all these monsters in it. Therefore, in the House of Lords that remained in the United Kingdom, a few of the lords who participated in the regular session of the House of Lords performed a traditional play of barbecuing a living person in front of everyone. It was a pity that this traditional performance was not traditional enough without the church hosting it. After the ashes of the vampires were disco dancing, the relevant personnel of the European community came forward to sweep the ashes. The group of people pretended that nothing had happened and continued the meeting. The industrial area of Detroit was made up of a large number of abandoned factories and residential areas. The place was desolate and rundown. Dao Feng walked through the abandoned houses. Beside him, a group of black and white youths gathered together, looking dispirited. They curled up at the ends of the streets, and some of them were even discreetly looking at Dao Feng. Blade's black face gave him a lot of convenience. Many people looked away when they saw his face. Another black man who had nothing to do. There was no shortage of black gangsters here. Blades felt his way to the stronghold of a black vampire he knew. Yes, there were black vampires too, and they generally lived a miserable life. Who said that there was no racial discrimination among vampires? They were both vampires, and they could mingle in the upper class just by having a white skin. At the very least, they could live among the decadent youths in the big cities. Yes, the kind of low-level vampires who drank the poisonous blood of drug addicts on the streets, as Staff had said. However, black vampires were also discriminated against among vampires. Their status was even lower than some white-skinned blood thralls and slurps. They could only live in a rundown place like Detroit and occasionally attack a few black and white hooligans. The quality of their blood was much better. Although they also took drugs, at least they had a strong physique. But he had no money and belonged to the countryside among vampires. Because of his skin color, Blade had quite a bit of prestige among them. After all, he was a well-known figure. He was also a vampire, and a rare breed among vampires, a daywalker. If word of this got out, it would help the black vampires gain face. Therefore, Blade would occasionally get some information from these people, and he would be merciful enough to spare their lives. After all, the police would occasionally keep a few informants. But this time, when he found the gathering place of his informants, Blade knocked on the door several times, but there was no response. He felt that something was wrong and kicked the door open. Inside was a low living room. There were some messy hookah pipes, tin foil, pistols, and small bills on the table. There was only a layer of black ashes on the large sofa, and a black girl lying naked in the bedroom. Blade recognized these ashes. In fact, he often made such things. His face was gloomy. Although the house was a bit messy and there were signs of a struggle, Blade did not see any damage from a fight. He tried to imagine what had happened here, a group of black vampires taking drugs, and then someone knocked on the door and he came in, and suddenly turned on the ultraviolet light in front of the vampires. No, there was something wrong. Dao Feng sensed the logical flaw in his assumption. He had to find out who had done all this. Although he did not care about the life and death of a few vampires, he had seen through it long ago. He was not a human, nor a vampire, not even a black person. He was alone. Blade made the call. Whistler, I've discovered something wrong. Wu Mohu looked at the ashes left behind by the vampire elders who claimed to have the secret of the primitive Ebola virus and wanted to cooperate with him to obtain the power of the primitive virus. He was a little stunned. Something was wrong with this development. He could tell at a glance that all the vampires he had come into contact with in Wakanda were dead. He had just gone to check on the spies that the vampires had used to infiltrate this place. All of them had been turned into ashes. The witnesses he had sent to monitor the situation claimed that the vampire elders were screaming in pain as they melted and evaporated. Wu Mohu was thinking about his scheme. Now that things had come to this, he would not regret not protecting their potential allies on Earth. Instead, he was calculating what he could use to his advantage. Now there are videos everywhere on Twitter. Citizens have filmed at least 60 people breaking out of their houses or spontaneously combusting in public. The president even saw an aide turn into ashes in the White House. In the congressional office, 2 senators and their men were screaming and melting. At a defense conference, even 2 generals were attacked. Now the Department of Defense has claimed that they were attacked by chemical weapons. The Congress and the White House want us to give them an explanation. Nick Fury was furious. Why do we have to give the vampires an explanation? The vampires have infiltrated the Department of Defense. They should give me an explanation. Where did this attack on the vampires come from? Nick Fury asked. The director of SHIELD, Coulson, who had no sense of presence, was opposite him. Nick One-Eyed was now the representative of the World Security Council to SHIELD, and the former director, Alexander Pierce, held this position before his identity as an undercover agent of Hydra was exposed. Coulson said, "The Brotherhood of the Holy Shield just sent us a document indicating that this matter is related to them. In the circle base of the former Holy Spear Bureau, they changed the physical properties of ultraviolet rays around the world so that they can penetrate conventional obstacles without attenuation. Our laboratory has just tested and found that the ultraviolet rays in the sun have undergone a qualitative change called darkening. They have become a kind of dark energy. Only when they encounter organic organisms will they come into contact with them because of the principles we currently do not understand. So, no matter where you are now, you will be exposed to ultraviolet radiation. The Revolutionary Alliance has turned on an ultraviolet light on the Earth. Nick Fury said, "They are exterminating vampires. Maybe there will be individuals who survive for special reasons, but vampires as a population are extinct." They came to ask us about our attitude towards vampires the other day and asked us to send back an investigation document. The government will also ask the people's attitude before making laws, before raising prices and collecting taxes. So are they our government? Who gave them the right to commit genocide in the United States? Don't forget that even if they are vampires, they are also U.S. citizens. The Revolutionary Alliance has no right to kill them. If they want to do it, it should be us, S-H-I-E-L-D ourselves. Nick roared, "They are violating our rights, violating the sovereignty of the United States." But, Coulson hesitated, they are doing it in the name of the Holy Shield Brotherhood. The Holy Shield Brotherhood is nominally established by the East and the West and is an organization registered with the World Security Council. Although the Revolutionary Alliance controls it, we are also nominally a part of it. It is difficult for us to protest against the actions of the Revolutionary Alliance. Just like the United States under the banner of the United Nations. Nick sneered. He was silent after saying that, then said, "I was wrong. We must admit that the actions of the Holy Shield Brotherhood are supported by us. Now that S.H.I.E.L.'s influence in the United States and the World Security Council is very low, we must take this opportunity to re-emphasize our influence. This matter cannot be done by the Revolutionary Alliance alone, but we must work together. I neglected the power and influence of the Holy Shield Brotherhood. It may have existed in name in the past, but when the Revolutionary Alliance truly supports it and puts on its skin, the Holy Shield Brotherhood has truly amazing power and influence. Exterminating the vampires will not only not be condemned, but will also announce its official resurrection. We can no longer deal with the Holy Shield Brotherhood coldly. If we don't want to be marginalized in the fight against alien invasion and protect Earth, and S.H.I.E.L.D. will completely lose its influence, we must compete with the Revolutionary Alliance for control and power over the Holy Shield Brotherhood. We must reverse our strategy against the Holy Shield Brotherhood, report to the World Security Council and the Department of Defense that this incident is the result of the joint cooperation between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the former Holy Spear Bureau under the framework of the Holy Shield Brotherhood. Fully support the Holy Shield Brotherhood and infiltrate it. Only when the spear and the shield are together can it be the Holy Shield. We can no longer let the captain control the power of the Holy Shield that belongs to the West. He is too politically naive. The Holy Shield used the actions of the alien Ebony Maw on Earth to intensify the conflict between various organizations and the local forces on Earth, dividing the world into two clear sides. One is their allies, and the other is their enemy. Then, they unite their allies and eradicate the enemy. Now they are exterminating the vampires on the grounds that they are involved in the alien conspiracy. This is the manifestation of this strategy. I have to say that this is a correct and effective strategy. Sometimes you not only need to destroy your enemies, but you also need them to be exposed, especially when you have the advantage. At this time, most of the political silence is not acquiescence, but a potential crisis. Since it is so useful, we should also use this strategy. The vampires are just the beginning. What we really need to do is, Chenong said at the Holy Shield Brotherhood's collective meeting, "Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will die. All the hidden clowns and bugs on Earth must be eliminated." In his mansion, Anthony Stark was looking at the financial report, which was full of huge expenses. In the messy financial data, which ensured that the Federal Tax Bureau wouldn't be able to figure out what was going on. Tony used his super high IQ to sort out the intricacies of the situation. Friday said, "Sir, those companies are already under our control. In the capital carnival of the destruction of the vampires, Tawny, with his superb insight and wisdom, as well as the political influence and strength of the Stark Group, took the biggest piece. The key was that the other consortiums did not know that it was him who did it. They knew that Stark had taken some laboratories and patents, but they did not know how much Tawny had taken. That was 20 times the capital of the Stark Group. Although the Stark Group did not rely on absolute capital to operate, but based on technology and patents, industrial technology and productivity, so its scale was far smaller than the financial group. But now the biggest mountain of the financial group belonged to Stark. When I was young, I once thought of a very interesting theory. Tawny held the red wine and said, "Capital always flows to higher places and tends to be concentrated. That is to say, capital always concentrates in more capital, money will invest in more money, and eventually, they will gather together, and the gap between the rich and the poor will be completely widened. A rich man will occupy all the capital in society. That may be the end of capitalism, that is the end of the capitalist class." I thought this was a crazy fantasy. Now it seems that it is not unreasonable. Humans need a person to operate these capital rationally, and they need someone to arrange everything for them. That person should be me. Tawny's face was hidden in the shadows. He picked up the glass and took a sip. Chapter 1084. Andromeda Galaxy. Skrulls. Green-skinned Skrulls that had evolved from reptiles came out of their dwellings in groups, staring at the sky. Over the sky, a huge steel construct streaked across the sky, its shadow covering the land. In the outer space of the Skrulls' homeworld, a Kirov-class interstellar cruiser with a 5-pointed star emblem hung on its bow slowly sailed past. Further away, the wreckage of countless Skrulls' starships floated in the dark, cold space. The entire Andromeda M31 galaxy had been reduced to a huge battlefield, with the wreckage of metal warships showing signs of being torn, twisted, and melted. In the vast vacuum of space, the battlefield was both small and vast, and compared to the M31 galaxy, the wreckage was as insignificant as a grain of sand in the vast ocean. But from a human's perspective, the wreckage was no smaller than the surrounding planets, orbiting a star as large as a planet. One could imagine that after millions of years, the microorganisms and bacteria that mimicked the ecosystem in the wreckage would flourish on the Skrulls' corpses, and the intelligent life they would evolve into would develop a new civilization in the wreckage's homeworld. The Skrull Emperor looked at the fleet in outer space with a complicated expression, his expression struggling for a moment before he ordered the activation of the palace's remaining defensive measures. After the Scaps fleet had torn through most of the defenses of the Skrulls' homeworld, his palace's main defensive system as the Skrull Emperor no longer held any meaning. The green-skinned Skrull Emperor's skin squirmed as he turned into a bearman with a high nose and deep eyes. The Skrulls evolved from reptiles, and in the process of evolution, like the chameleons on Earth, the Skrulls had also developed advanced shape-shifting abilities. Each of them could be said to be a natural spy, and in the history of the Skrull civilization's rise, they would often imitate the appearance of aliens from other planets and infiltrate their civilization to steal technology or destroy it, gradually growing into one of the 3 great alien empires of the galaxy. The Skrulls had a unique imitation civilization, and their technological system was built upon a series of aggressive behaviors such as imitation, invasion, and digestion. The Skrull Emperor sent out a clear code communication signal, which was received by General Zhukov on the flagship of the Soviet fleet. The video of the Skrull Emperor was projected to the flagship's command center. The Supreme Skrull Emperor was kneeling on the ground, offering his crown to the Soviet soldiers surrounding the planet Skrulls. "Conquerors from afar, I surrender to you on behalf of the Skrulls. I beg you not to destroy our home planet and preserve our civilization. We are willing to pay any price for this, as punishment for starting this war. The Skrulls are willing to serve you and submit to the rule of the Revolutionary Alliance. Zhu Kefu waited for the Civilization Ruling Committee's decision. As a soldier, he could give suggestions on whether to keep a hostile civilization or not, but he could not make a decision. The Civilization Ruling Committee was jointly established by the 3 allied nations of the Revolutionary Alliance. Based on the grand unification of information technology, the information manipulation technology and parallel world observation technology derived from it, the collective consciousness of the Soviet Iron Will, the Republic's ultimate humanity, the will of China, the European Community's Voyage Committee, and other organizations to judge and deal with the enemy civilization. They would record all information of the civilization, examine the collective subconsciousness of the hostile civilization, and after reaching 2 magnitudes, observe all possibilities of the civilization, and finally make a comprehensive decision. Generally speaking, it was rare to choose to completely destroy a civilization in times of peace. Unfortunately, it was a special period when the Revolutionary Alliance was facing the greatest danger and the cruelest war. Zhu Kefu waited for the Civilization Ruling Committee's reply. Zhu Kefu raised his hand and ordered his fleet to fire the Star Destroyer cannons. As a soldier, he could not oppose the Civilization Ruling Committee's decision, and this was the only way to express his mourning for the death of a powerful civilization. No, the Skrull Emperor wailed in despair as he saw the Soviet fleet readjusting their battle lines. I beg you, don't destroy us. The Skrull Emperor's expression was one of despair and helplessness. In his final moments, he remembered the civilizations destroyed and slaughtered by the Skrulls, and there was no doubt that the past glory of the Skrulls was one of the main reasons the Civilization Ruling Committee made such a judgment. The Skrulls on Skroz were already aware of the outcome through the Advanced Information Network. They all hugged each other and looked at the sky in despair. Starting from the Skrull Emperor, everyone had assumed the appearance of Earthlings, making Skroz look like a human planet. They were desperately begging for the Destroyer's sympathy, as well as resisting the destruction. Look, you destroyed us today, and you will be destroyed tomorrow. White radiance of energy began to appear at the cannons of the Soviet fleet. The Prime Minister of the Skrulls, an old Skrull, stumbled to the Emperor and said regretfully, "We should not have listened to Thanos' bewitchment and provoked a behemoth we could not afford to. He lied to us so that we could avoid the Devourer from targeting our homeworld. But he did not tell us that the reason the Devourer would forgive us was because we took the initiative to get involved in the vortex of these 2 behemoths. Now, the Skrulls are about to be destroyed. I hate it." The Skrull Emperor wailed. Why, 30 years ago, when the planet Devourer was about to destroy Shroth, we chose Earth as the target of immigration. At that time, the people of Earth were still so weak, and they could only rely on the strength of a woman to temporarily defeat us. In just a short period of time, the Earth that appeared in front of us again has such a powerful civilization? I hate Thanos for lying to us, hate the Devourer for wanting to devour our planet and leave us with nowhere to go, but what I hate the most is the Earthlings. They destroyed everything we had. Even if we had humbly begged them for mercy. I had also mercilessly destroyed those planets that begged us for mercy, using their homeworlds to delay the Devourer. But even if we were once guilty, it should not end like this. Convey my last order, Prime Minister. The Skrull Emperor calmed down and stood in front of the cannons of the Soviet fleet and ordered. Convey this to those who are still lurking on Earth. The Skrulls have been destroyed. For the Skrulls take revenge on Earth. They are the last avengers of our civilization. We will drag you into hell with us. The Soviet fleet's cannons fired in unison, and in the white torrent of destruction, it was like a magnificent scene of a white hole exploding. Countless colors of light mixed with the energy torrent of annihilation rushed towards Skroz, and in the colors of destruction, everything was obliterated into nothingness, leaving only a distorted space, and the damage would slowly be eliminated over the countless years to come. In Hawkeye's home, his wife heard a knock on the door and opened it in surprise, only to see a red-haired girl smiling at her outside the door. She knew this woman. Hawkeye had once brought his comrades to her house to let them rest temporarily. At that time, the fusion of Sargeras and Ultron almost destroyed the world. Everyone suffered setbacks in the hands of Adam, and their morale was low. For this reason, Hawkeye brought them back to his small home and told them why they fought. Natasha smiled and took out a small gift and said, "I just returned to this country, and I came to visit you." Hawkeye's wife warmly welcomed them and said, "Come in." Nick Fury pushed open the door, and what appeared in front of him was the eyes of Hawkeye's wife. The remaining brilliance in the glass body and the look of disbelief on her face made Nick Fury's heart tighten. "Who did it?" Nick said angrily, "Who did it?" Coulson came to him with a heavy face and whispered, "The security equipment in the house has been cleaned, and the technique is very professional. But our big data system calculates that the man appeared in the satellite of HRU before he entered the safe house of Hawkeye. Hawkeye's home is confidential, and the 2 agents who protected them were killed before they could send the signal. Not many people know about this place, and there are only 3 people in SHIELD. However, the Avengers have been here, and Natasha later rebelled. No one knows if she reported the situation here to the PELD. Now that Hawkeye and the PELD are in the Holy Shield Brotherhood, they will not act like this for no reason and split the Holy Shield. We have told him about the misfortune that happened here. The PELD will give us a reply." Nick Fury suddenly raised his hand and touched his blind eye, whispering, "The last time I trusted someone, I lost this eye. What happened here is so strange that it reminds me of what happened before. We need Captain Marvel to investigate this matter. Perhaps we will face a test of trust. The danger is no longer before the truth is found out, but after the truth is found out." The remaining eye of Nick Fury burst with suspicion. At this moment, he no longer trusted anyone, including Coulson behind him. T'Challa and Hawkeye returned to Wakanda. Their target was a man in a scaled leather suit, Namor, the Sea King from Atlantis. Chapter 1085. Hawkeye and T'Challa stood on the shore, looking at the shoreline in front of them. Just as they reached the shore, the calm sea that had been lapping against the shore in a cycle began to stir. The waves were getting higher and higher, the sea breeze gradually becoming stronger, and the muddy tide quickly overflowed the original shoreline. The tide rose rapidly, passing dozens of meters and arriving at Hawkeye and T'Challa's feet. They were standing on a cliff by the sea, about 4 or 5 meters from the shoreline, but now the waves were beating against the cliff, and the water droplets were already splashing on their faces, the salty seawater assaulting their nostrils. In the midst of the raging waves, a huge spray suddenly rose from the sea like a pillar of water rising into the sky. Countless white waves that undulated like galloping horses gathered together, and a man's head emerged from the spray. The seawater slid down his short black hair and flowed over his chiseled face. His body gradually rose in the huge waves, and the trident in his right hand flashed with cold light, its entire body made of mixed gold. The man stepping on the huge wave was naked from the waist up, his muscles bulging. He only wore a pair of scaled leather shorts, and the foam from the spray slowly slid down his calves. He floated on the water with his arms crossed, and the huge wave under his feet surrounded him like a throne. The huge wave lifted him even higher than Hawkeye and the others, so that the Sea Prince could look down at them with a sarcastic and disdainful smile. "I am the Prince of Atlantis, the future master of the 7 seas, Namor." The Sea Prince said arrogantly, "You bunch of stupid monkeys. Did you come here to beg for mercy?" "Prince," T'Challa whispered into Hawkeye's ear, "looks like this heir hasn't taken the throne yet. When I was a prince, I was much more well-behaved than him." "According to intelligence," Hawkeye replied quietly, This Prince Namor is a mixed blood of Atlantean and human. You know how much the Atlanteans discriminate against humans. He is probably the most unpopular prince of Atlantis, so he has to show the most hostile attitude towards humans. Other princes can be arrogant and ignore them, but he has to show his disdain and hostility towards his own human bloodline. This I know. Those who are discriminated against and oppressed are often the vanguard of discrimination and oppression. The second Japanese are usually more brutal than the Japanese, T'Challa said. This guy is very mindful of his bloodline, so he'll talk to you with his nose in the air. I think my identity should be able to make him behave. After all, I'm still a king. So T'Challa took a step forward and said, Prince of Atlantis, I, the King of Wakanda, the new Black Panther, the protector of vibranium. I came here to find you, to question, why did you ally with the people who invaded my country? A stray dog that was chased out? Namor said disdainfully, the king of the monkeys, dares to question the true king. T'Challa was infuriated by his contemptuous tone. He could hear that this Atlantean prince was blatantly expressing his discrimination against humans and other civilizations, even hostile attitude. How could T'Challa accept such an attitude? Not to mention him, even Hawkeye was so angry that he wanted to laugh. Hawkeye said, I don't think we can communicate with him, and he won't communicate with us. Therefore, we still have to use the universal method. We always use this method with the aliens before we can communicate. What method? T'Challa asked curiously. Hawkeye, beat him up. What the two did not expect was that Namor would make the first move. He rode the huge wave and pounced forward, hundreds of tons of seawater crashing toward the two. Namor was wrapped in the huge wave, his trident driving the seawater to create a huge kinetic energy. At the same time, he could attack flexibly in the water. Faced with the impact of such a large amount of seawater, most people would be at a loss. At this time, Namor could use the trident to take his life by surprise. But the Black Panther's body shook, and he put on his battle suit. Hawkeye drew his bow and shot an arrow, aiming at Namor, who was shuttling between the gaps of the seawater. The huge kinetic energy hit the Black Panther, filling his battle suit with energy. The Black Panther was also very agile in the water. His legs seemed to be rooted to the ground, and he faced the impact of the huge wave calmly. His sharp claws accurately grabbed Namor's trident. Hawkeye's arrow pierced through the waves. The arrows that were specially prepared for this mission were streamlined, and they swam as nimbly as a silver fish in the water. They swam toward Namor. Atlantean technology was very advanced, but Namor did not like to carry high-tech items on him. Therefore, even if Namor discovered these arrows, he could only use his trident to manipulate the seawater to form a whirlpool to restrain them. The Black Panther grabbed the golden trident, and its claws left deep marks on the trident. This caused a flash of pain in Namor's eyes. The seawater around him pushed him, forming a powerful force that pressed down on T'Challa. But T'Challa's battle suit had already accumulated hundreds of tons of seawater pressure. He suddenly exploded with this kinetic energy, and the huge force lifted Namor up. The arrows took the opportunity to approach. Hawkeye used the anti-gravity equipment to float in the air, constantly shooting these arrows. Although most of them were washed away by the current, he kept adding arrows to Namor's side. There would always be an opportunity. An arrow that looked like a silver fish, driven by the magnetized seawater that was constantly ejected from its tail, moved at an astonishing speed underwater. It rushed to Namor's side, and only slowed down when it encountered the high-density seawater around Namor's body. Namor caught it in his hand, but the arrow flickered twice and immediately exploded. These arrows were actually miniature torpedoes that looked like arrows. Namor cried out in pain. He clutched his arm, and red blood seeped out of his palm, spreading in the water. Hawkeye murmured at a low altitude, I thought there was something different about the Atlanteans. Turns out that blood is red too. How dare you hurt the Prince of Atlantis? Namo clutched his arm and said crazily, You've committed an unforgivable crime. What are you trying to do? Black Panther punched him in the face. The vibrating gold battle suit continued to vibrate, and the high-frequency vibration cut through the seawater around him, making his movements as agile as on land. Moreover, it could easily break through the high-density seawater that protected Namo's body. The vibrating gold could also provide Black Panther with underwater oxygen supply. The battle suit in the Holy Shield had been modified by the Human Revolutionary Alliance, adding an underwater function. Unfortunately, Namo was the first experimenter. The Human Revolutionary Alliance was trustworthy. In the underwater battle between Black Panther and Namo, generally speaking, Namo always had the upper hand based on his rich experience and his bloodline to adapt to the underwater environment, but this time his experience did not work. The newly added underwater sensing of the vibrating gold battlesuit was like the two lines on the side of a fish's body, sensitive to the vibrations in the water. With the sensory organs of a fish, Black Panther could sense everything underwater by the fluctuations of the water. This was more reliable than his eyes. Namo, who did not have the battlesuit to increase his strength, and the trident in his hand that controlled seawater was not useful in close combat, had already suffered a few punches. If Black Panther did not care about his identity and did not use the vibrating gold claw, he might have been seriously injured. But even so, Namo's situation was still very bad. He felt that he had lost face, so his attacks became more and more frenzied. This was a little troublesome for Takara. He could not really kill him. Namo did not represent just himself. For Wakanda, he did not want to offend the Atlanteans. Just when Black Panther was a little hesitant and ready to capture Namo, a few Atlantean warriors in armor swam over. They raised the halberds in their hands and created a powerful shockwave in the seawater. They stopped Hawkeye and T'Challa's actions and took the opportunity to rescue Namor. Chapter 1086. Chun-Ong looked through the new documents sent by the UPA and saw the video attached to the document. The satellite observation of the UPA was extremely accurate, and it clearly captured Natasha knocking on the door of Hawkeye's house. Even the color of her red hair was accurate. He handed the documents to Steve, and Captain America hurriedly flipped through the documents, showing his anger. He still remembered that when the Avengers lost their fighting spirit, Hawkeye took them to his home and asked his wife to entertain them and tell them what the Avengers were fighting for. But now that party had caused irreversible consequences. Steve felt very guilty. There seemed to be a fire burning in his heart. "We must give Hawkeye an explanation," Steve said angrily. "We must avenge them. I will get to the bottom of this, even if it turns the world upside down." Natasha didn't do it, Chun-Ong said. She was in charge of dealing with the vampires at the time, and the UPA submitted a detailed investigation report to prove her innocence. And there are reports that 3 days ago, the Soviet fleet destroyed the Skrulls' home planet and destroyed the Skrull Empire in the Andromeda Galaxy. The Skrulls invaded Earth as early as the 1990s. They have very advanced technology, and they are best at imitation and transformation. They can copy almost all the abilities of the imitated. Chun-Ong handed over a SHIELD file and said, "This is the relevant file of the incident in the 1990s. We applied to SHIELD for access. This may be the revenge of the remaining Skrull spies on Earth, in retaliation for the destruction of their country." "Why did the UPA destroy the Skrulls?" Steve asked. Slaughtering the women and children of an entire race should not be the behavior of a civilized country. In the 90s of the last century, the home planet of the Skrulls was occupied by the Star Devourer, a cosmic god that feeds on living planets. The Skrulls could not fight against this terrible existence, so they chose to invade other planets. The planets of other races that they conquered were all in the Andromeda Galaxy, which was too close to their home planet. They feared that the Star Devourer would shift its target to their new home planet after devouring their home planet. So they decided to choose a planet that was further away. They chose Earth. Do you know how the Skrulls will treat the indigenous people of Earth if their invasion succeeds? I have a document here, Chenong said. It's part of the information that the Revolutionary Alliance consulted before they decided to destroy the Skrulls. It's their military plan for invading Earth and their follow-up plan. Steve opened the translated document. He glanced at it and immediately covered the folder. The smell of blood between the lines made it difficult for him to contain his anger. Steve was not a good Samaritan. Otherwise, how could he have killed those German lads who had families and loved ones on the battlefield of World War II? He knew that there was a price to pay for war. War was killing. Therefore, after learning that the Skrulls were all soldiers and that aggression was second nature to them, he did not think that the lives of the Skrulls were more important than the safety of humans on Earth. Moreover, the Skrull Empire had committed many crimes. On Earth, because the water on this planet was too deep, they did not succeed. Instead, they suffered a big loss. But on the planets of other weak races, they caused genocide and planet destruction. They were used to fill the stomach of the Star Devourer. This race is not worthy of sympathy. The Revolutionary Alliance may have their own considerations, Steve said. Chenong took over the conversation. The Human Revolutionary Alliance has been working hard to protect this planet. The lawless lands are suspicious of us, but we have the same stance. You mean this tragedy may be a conspiracy of the Skrulls? Steve asked. Chenong nodded, and then Steve formally negotiated. I will help Hawkeye control his emotions, but you must give us an explanation as soon as possible. I believe that what Hawkeye needs is the truth, not to vent his emotions and pain. But the condition is that it must be the truth. If you hide even the slightest bit, we will investigate it ourselves. Moreover, the safe house where Hawkeye's family is located is a very high-level secret. After we went there last time, they had already moved the location of the safe house, but now it has been exposed. In the entire SHIELD, only Nick Fury and Coulson know where Hawkeye's family is. In addition, only a few Level 10 agents have the ability to investigate the location of the safe house through the previous residents, and Natasha is one of them. Where did the Skrulls get this top-secret information? Steve questioned. You need to give us the truth about these questions. Just then, Steve received a call from T'Challa. Steve, you should know the news. T'Challa said anxiously. Listen to me, after Hawkeye found out, he has already lost control. He is now rushing to the headquarters. You must stop him. This is obviously a conspiracy of the enemy. You can't let him make mistakes on impulse. He is losing his mind now, which is what the enemy wants. I will go back to stop him. If he wants revenge, I will accompany him. But I will also stop his irrational behavior. The Revolutionary Alliance has already informed us. They have evidence to prove that Natasha did not do it. Natasha? T'Challa was shocked. This has something to do with her? Hawkeye returned to the floating pyramid. In his anger, he did not even abide by the security regulations, but no one dared to stop the completely crazy Hawkeye. He put an arrow on his bow and shouted to the surroundings, I have bled and sweated for you, and this is the result. I have retired. For you, Steve, for you, I came back to fight again. But you let my family suffer. Steve rushed over and saw Hawkeye's desperate and crazy face. He felt very guilty. He walked over and said painfully, I'm sorry, brother. Hawkeye punched him in the face and knocked the captain to the ground. Steve did not resist. He let himself be knocked to the ground. Hawkeye held his bow and arrows and said to the surroundings, Natasha, you come out. Natasha, I'm going to kill you. Steve got up and stopped him. Natasha didn't do this. Hawkeye continued to punch him in the face. This punch was full of strength, and the unprepared Captain America was stunned. Even with his strong recovery ability, it took him a while to recover. At this time, Natasha turned into a red shadow and kicked Hawkeye, who had his bow drawn and was aiming at Captain America. She used a set of close combat skills to force Hawkeye to block repeatedly, and the bow in his hand was basically useless. Natasha said, "You are very wrong, Hawkeye. The Hawkeye I know would never let his emotions get the better of him." "You killed my family, and you still want me to be polite to you?" Hawkeye said. "A debt of blood can only be repaid with blood." Natasha did not argue. She wanted to capture Hawkeye before talking. After the strengthening of the Soviet body, Natasha's strength had changed qualitatively. In the past, Natasha relied on the combat skills she learned in the spy training camp, which emphasized skills, agility, and various small equipment on her body, such as electric shock devices or poison needles. So in the past, when Natasha encountered a strong enemy, it was always difficult for her to deal with them. She would either use the strength of her thigh, which was the strongest part of the head, to attack the carotid artery, which could make the enemy lose the ability to fight for a short time, or use poison needles, which was the assassination method she learned in the spy training camp. Or she would use the electric shock bracelet, a high-tech device made by SHIELD. But now, with one punch, Natasha could punch a pile of meat into the high-strength special concrete. Her own fist, her strength was very strong, which allowed her to have the power of a lion fighting a rabbit. Natasha's streamlined muscles began to expand and contract. Her arm rushed forward and smashed on Hawkeye's alloy bow. The high-tech bow made of super-tough alloy was broken into two pieces. Hawkeye's arm was bent backward unnaturally. He let out a muffled groan and was sent flying. Natasha caught up with Hawkeye, who was still in the air. She grabbed his right arm and pulled her body like a bow. She threw Hawkeye to the ground and smashed him heavily. At this time, Steve stood in front of Natasha. He did not carry a shield, but used his equally strong physique to fight head-on with Natasha. Their reaction speed made the battle between them seem to be carried out at a super high speed. Their agile movements were so fast that it was hard to react. If an ordinary person were to brush past them, they would be hit with a bloody hole in their body. Hawkeye roared on the ground, grabbed an arrow and stabbed it behind him. Natasha punched him hard in the joints, but Steve blocked the punch with his own chest. At the same time, the arrow in Hawkeye's hand pierced deep into his back and came out from the middle of his chest. Falcon Sam cried out in alarm, "Captain!" Natasha was also stunned. Hawkeye's mouth was wide open. He was shocked by his own accidental injury. Steve said with difficulty, "Now, can we sit down and have a good talk?" Sam rushed over and supported Steve. He looked at Natasha and Hawkeye fiercely and observed the captain's injury. "His internal organs are injured, stretcher." Strange hurriedly opened the portal to the medical room and helped Steve in with Sam. "I'm going to prepare for surgery." Strange said this and closed the portal. Natasha stood in the same place, looking at Steve's blood on her body. Hawkeye was also holding the broken alloy bow in a daze. Natasha saw the two pieces of the broken alloy bow and suddenly looked up. She grabbed Hawkeye's head and twisted it 360 degrees. She roared and pulled out Hawkeye's head along with his spine.